Okay, I think we can start now. Good morning to everyone, dear partners, dear guests, colleagues, and participants. On behalf of the Center for Change Management, I would like to welcome you on the second day of this workshop. Thank you very much for your presence here on this lovely Saturday morning. I promise you a very interesting agenda today as well, and I'm sure we will stay all together till the end of this working day. My name is Vesna Bočvarska. I am the Financial Director at the Center for Change Management. And today I will be your host, your moderator on this event, which is organized in the framework of the project Youth Involvement in a Constructive Dialogue in Contemporary Western Balkan. This is the second day actually of the second workshop. It is organized in Skopje. It is actually online, but it's organized by the partners from Skopje CCM. As most of you already know, within the project, there are envisaged 4 workshops. The first one was realized already in Tirana in April this year. This is the second one in Skopje. The third one will be in Rome, in Italy, in October this year. And the last one will be in Paris, in France, in January next year. We have also foreseen a final conference for dissemination of all the outputs and results achieved within the project, which will be organized in April next year in Tirana. And I truly believe that we will be all present there in person, and there will be no more online events due to COVID pandemic. Just in short, I have to mention a few more things regarding the project. The duration of the project is 18 months and is targeting especially youth from Albania, North Macedonia, Italy, and France, as well as academic, politicians, civil society, decision makers in remembering the past in order to secure and fight for a better future for all. The main goal of the project is to foster national and transnational youth activist dialogue about the reflection of past communist regimes in contemporary Western Balkan and EU countries. The leading organization of this project is Center for Comparative and International Studies, and the partners are Mediterranean Center and CIDEF from Albania, Patrimoine Sans Frontières from France, Peripli Organization from Italy, and we, the Center for Change Management from North Macedonia. The theme of this particular second workshop is the effect of rapid social changes during post-communist transition and people's perception in Macedonia. As I mentioned,
на луѓето во Македонија. Како што веќе спомнав и претходно, се работи за трудневна работа.
In the event with very prominent professors and ex-ministers in Macedonia's first government after the independence of Yugoslavia. We had a very fruitful discussions. They were talking about the independence through peaceful self-determination and policy of identities and liberal democracy in transitional countries. Today, as you can see in the agenda, we have even more professors and researchers to discuss and share with us their views on topics and make our day even more interesting. For tomorrow, we have planned an organized visit to the Museum of Contemporary Art that will be facilitated by our guest, Vladimir Jančevski. He will share with us more info about the importance and significance of this museum. And then, of course, we will do some networking at Mikasa Cafe, which is very close to the museum. In the chat, I will share with you my email address. So please, all of you that would like to join the guided tour in the museum, confirm your presence in the email in order we can calculate the tickets, the participants, the number of participants, and other logistical matters. The working language of this event is English, as you know already. However, we do have provided simultaneous interpretation in Macedonian language. It is available, and you can activate the interpretation on the interpretation button down in the bottom of the screen. Regarding your questions and comments to our guests, please write them in the chat so the panelists can answer and refer to them, or raise your hand and I will let you speak. Before we start, I would also like to ask the panelists, the guests, to take care of the duration also of their presentations, since the time management is also very important in such online events. Now, I won't take any long with the introduction. We have a full agenda today and many interesting panelists. So I would like to invite the first panelist, Professor Yeton Shasivari, who is a professor of constitutional and administrative law from the Law Faculty of Southeast European University. And he will take the floor and share with us his views on what were the constitutional aspects of transition in North Macedonia. Professor Yeton, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Vesna. I hope that you can hear me all. Hello
Yes.
to everyone. So I will talk about constitutional aspects of transition in our country, in North Macedonia, partocracy versus governance for citizens. The 1991 constitution falls in the group of liberal democratic constitutions, and the main goal of this constitution was the independence of the state from the former Yugoslavia, and to mark the beginning of the contemporary development of our state as an independent and sovereign state, which completely broke the ties from the previous socialist constitutionality and went through complete democratic reorganization and transfer of the society and the country from a system with deeply enrooted socialist character to a new democratic system. In particular, the 1991 constitution abandons the numerous ideological determinations and values that the then current ruling ideology had as basis, such as socialist self-governing democracy, rule of the working class, undisputed rule of one political party, the concept of socio-political communities, the delegate system, etc. So the constitution affirms in their place the commitment to ownership, political pluralism, and the market economy. It proclaims the principle of separation of power. North Macedonia is a state with a republican form of rule, based on the sovereignty that derives from the citizens and belongs to the citizens. North Macedonia is defined as democratic state based on the sovereignty that belongs to all citizens of the republic, regardless of their national, religious, or other affiliations, who are equal and have the same rights and freedoms. But the essence of the problem of constitutional transition in North Macedonia is in the constitutionality and not in the constitution itself, because the main challenge of constitutionality lies in the attempt to combine power and justice with political technology. So I think that the constitution of our country has failed in what was most expected of it, so namely to establish a legal and social order safe from crisis, from shocks. And the main constitutional institutions in North Macedonia are at that end, because the already 30-year transition created a mess in the legal and political system, where the main reason is the long process of accession of North Macedonia to the European Union. Therefore, I think that it's time to declare the end of the transition and to rebuild the constitutional institutions of North Macedonia through the democratic development of the state and institutions. We are late, but it is not too late for this, because as US President Ronald Reagan used to say, the dream is still with us. While I would add, the European dream is still with us in North Macedonia. However, what I want to focus on today is the issue of partocracy, or the governance of political parties, as a major challenge to the democracy of North Macedonia, because the legislature and the executive power are united in a political power, behind which stand the political parties of the ruling majority, and versus political powers is the judiciary. So practically, instead of having three branches of power, we have only two branches of state power. Therefore, the main issue is related to the question, in what form should political power be subject to the law through independent judiciary? Such a situation makes our democracy semi-consolidated due to partocracy. The parties or their key people hold the most important positions in the parliament, government, and civil service. This is especially evident when the party is in government. So if the basic role of the political parties is to come to power and rule, they have achieved that today more than ever before. For the parties, it seems that there is no more obsession with doctrines, programs, and ideas, but particular interests dominate, and the aspiration to gain as much power and authority as possible. So the main problem here in North Macedonia is that there are no ideological parties. In the absence of conviction and principles, a party strives for success for the sake of success. The party seeks to eventually come to power and keep it in its hands for as long as possible. So in North Macedonia, we have patronage parties. Patronage parties exist with the aim of bringing their leader or leadership to a leading position through elections, so that he or she can then entrust state services to his or her supporters. From the other hand, a strong and independent middle class is a basic social precondition for the establishment and consolidation of a democratic order. It is mainly based on private property and education, and is interested in economic progress, the rule of law, and social stability. With its value system, the middle class gravitates to the political center and avoids extreme left or extreme right positions and populism. The middle classes in stable democracies and in former socialist societies differed significantly. While in the West, the middle class is economically independent, in socialism, the middle class was largely dependent on the state. So the concentration of power is accompanied by an increase in social inequalities, with the middle social class losing political and economic ties to the higher spheres, in which members of the ruling class are distributed among themselves. The main consequence of this situation is the disappearance of the huge middle class created during Yugoslav socialism, as well as the emergence of an increasingly numerous lower class that is in need and lack opportunities. And one of the key consequences caused by changes in the social structure is the increase of differentiations between the top and the bottom. So the lower classes continue to be dependent on the state, which is a mutually wrong strategy. The lower classes are made up of routine officials, skilled and unskilled workers, the unemployed persons, and pensioners. By concentrating political pluralism and representation in four main political parties in North Macedonia, which in the election cycles from 2022 until today, they are changing their position so that always two main parties, one Macedonian and one Albanian, are in power and two other are in opposition. The power of the parties is strengthened and conditions are created for the formation of stable government, the efficient functioning of which is seen as major factor in the stability of the state. But on the other hand, along with strengthening of the executive's position in the power sharing system, authoritarianism and the exercise of power from above are gaining ground with increasingly weak legitimacy due to relatively low electoral support. So the voter turnout in parliamentary elections is on the downside. And on the other hand, even the strongest party cannot win an election with more than, let's say, 400,000 or maybe 500,000 votes, which is less than 30% of the total number of voters and less than 25% of the total population. So the political parties that form the ruling parliamentary majority and the government are transformed into a condenser of the political views and interests of the citizens with terrible recruiting power based on pre-election promises such as employment, promotions, solving social problems, etc. Instead of the citizen forming a political party, being above it and through it participating in the government and political decision making, the political party forms a party membership. So the effect of establishing partocracy is, this is the main effect, is the crisis of the parliament, which becomes an extended arm of the government and the ruling political parties, the suppression of the judiciary from its constitutional position to control the executive power, and also disrespecting fundamental human rights and freedoms. Indicative for North Macedonia, when we speak on the situation of occupation of the entire social life by the political parties, which creates the impression that the election contest between them is uninterrupted, is the comparative data according to which, for example, in the European Union, the party participation of the citizens is only about 5%. Of European citizens which belongs to political parties. So not only the parliament is a hostage of political parties, but society as a whole is a hostage of partocracy. The most explicit and obvious testimony to that are the leadership meetings.
Чиклено сведоштво за тоа се лидерски
which
на тоа кој што, за жал, е надвор од законскиот поредок, а каде се решаваат главните прашања. Овие лидерски средби ги го дерогираат уставниот
executive and judicial. The legislature should be the supreme power and to control the executive power. Unfortunately, this is not the case in practice in North Macedonia. So in this case, both the prime minister and the leader of the opposition are hierarchically under the legislature, under the parliament, and under the MPs. And we are put in a situation where the agreements they reach are legally binding for the parliament and for the MPs. So the leadership meetings are above the constitutional and political system of North Macedonia. For example, as was the case recently with the political agreement between the prime minister and the opposition leader in March this year on the postponement of the census, postponement of local elections, unblocking of the parliament, and some legal changes. In my view, the most interesting aspect of leadership meetings is in fact their determination as an informal mechanism, which in itself requires consideration. Above all, they are not part of any constitutional or legal norm. nor is there any legislation through which they are regulated. In this sense, leadership meetings are in function of unlocking the political process, which often comes to a standstill of complete stagnation, and institutions are treated as the last stage of formalizing the decision of leadership meetings as a mechanism through which the agreement should finally be implemented. The institutions are not creators of these solutions and do not participate in them, but they are just a silent observer and the channel through which the agreement is formally covered in an informal way. Leadership meetings have short-term benefits, but they produce long-term damage to the constitutional system for two main reasons. First, political leaders themselves reduce their democratic capacity to find political solutions. And second, political agreements reached at leadership meetings cannot be evaluated in their constitutional and legal terms, because the key institutions, such as the Constitutional Court, are completely out of this process. So leadership meetings are a non-transparent format for resolving political disagreements. Moreover, they delegitimize the parliament and deny its role as the guardian of sovereignty of citizens. This practice is the least desirable in the direction of democratization of our society. So, based on all this that has been said, the key question is how do political parties which occupy a central place in modern democratic societies get back on track and affirm themselves as promoters of democratic processes in North Macedonia? I think that here two things are quite important. First thing is the democratization, which is needed within the political parties themselves. Parties with an extremely authoritarian internal structure and hierarchy, so-called sultanate parties, cannot promote democracy in society, even when they are in opposition, much less when they come into power. Intra-party democratization is an important precondition for raising the general political culture, for developing the culture of tolerance and dialogue, and for objective media information. And the second thing is improving the constitutional framework that regulates the organization and operation of political parties in North Macedonia. By the fact that in the constitution as the highest legal act, it will be explicitly stated that political parties as subjects of struggle for greater democracy and freedoms do not fight for power for themselves, but for the power of the citizens, which is achieved directly or through their freely elected representatives, because only in this way we can hope to meet the important political criterion, which is functional democratic governance as a part of the Copenhagen political criteria that North Macedonia should meet as a candidate for EU membership. Okay, this was my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I respected the time.
More or less. Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Yeton. It was interesting to hear about the problem and challenges actually with the constitutionality and the constitutional institutions, not the constitution itself, and the challenges of the ruling of two main parties. They definitely need, the political parties need to get back on track and do democratizations of themselves, as you mentioned. And you explained the meaning of the leadership meetings, which are actually above the constitution. Also, the respect of human rights by the parties And in this slide, we will go with our next guest. And this is Professor Marina Andeva. She is from the University American College in Skopje, School of Political Science. Her field of interest is European Union, cross-border cooperation, regional autonomy and local self-government, migration, refugees, multiculturalism, and protection of minority rights. In this line, Professor Marina will share with us more about the minority rights, individual or collective protection. Professor Marina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vesna, for introducing me, and good morning and good Saturday to all. For the Italians, buon sabato, because I see a lot of Italians here, and I'm very glad because I used to live in Italy for quite some time. As Vesna mentioned, and as well as mentioned in the agenda, I will talk about minorities' rights, whether they're individual and collective protected. Through several models that are in academic assessment used to define how countries address minority rights and minority issues. And I will try to respect Vesna promised the given 15 minutes time that I have. So just an introduction, the protection of minorities in this academic assessment is often comprises sort of an analysis of existing legal frameworks, how they are actually managed, and also deals with the tendency whether this legal framework is fully implemented and respected in practice. Is also minority and minority rights is also an issue of a forefront in the political agenda of many countries as well. The protection of minorities has become also an important element for consideration in the country's monitoring and evaluation reports undertaken by international governmental organizations, but for the Balkans also undertaken mostly by the European Union. When we talk about European Union, we can say that it's undoubtedly a mechanism in terms of actual legislative change in the countries aspiring to enter into its bigger family. However, the European Union, when we come to the minority issues, is just a mechanism, is based on consensus politics, and the minority issues within the EU have had to be tackled in a very fractionate way and not a systematic screening and a systematic assessment. Issues that are relevant to minorities have been addressed by the European Union through non-discrimination and anti-discrimination legislative measures, social inclusion, cultural diversity, tolerance, and nevertheless there were commitments to initiatives on minorities, but they were mostly unsuccessful in practice. This actual fractionate way of addressing minority protection is seen through various legal frameworks existent in the EU member states, but as well as in the pre-accession and candidate countries, those that are a part also of the Council of Europe framework conventions for the protection of the national minorities and the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. Before I go into the goals of my presentation, I hope you can see it. It is shared. I would like to look at briefly and highlight some basic concepts and definitions. So the most recent minority distinction is one of the distinguishing national from ethnic minorities. It is believed in general, of course, that national minorities are those having a state, nation, of reference, a motherland, if you call it, or a kin state, while ethnic minorities does not have this privilege. However, the concept of nation also can be sometimes diversely interpreted. The Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, in a recommendation in 2006, has considered whether and how this concept can help really to address the question of national minorities and their rights in the 21st century in Europe, because the term nation in some Council of Europe member states is used to indicate citizenship, a legal link between a state and an individual, irrespectively whether it has a sort of an individual ethnocultural origin, while in other countries indicates an organic community speaking a different language and has a different characteristics as a set of similar cultural or historical tradition. The term nation is often used also in double meaning as well. In this respect, it's very easy to identify different types of minorities on the basis of the objective criteria, such as language, religion, culture. Therefore, we can find linguistic, religious, or cultural minorities in countries. These minorities can be also as well as national or ethnic minorities, and there are many definitions that countries irrespectively individually adopt. Also, we have to take into account Kim Lika, a very prominent academic and expert in multiculturalism and respect of minority rights, and his theory of minority rights when we use the term of culture as synonym to nation or people. Therefore, for him, for Kim Lika, a state is multicultural if its members are either belonging to different nations or they have emigrated from different nations, which this can be set as an example of polyethnic state. There are also definitions of all the new minorities, and this definition is based on an autochthonous set of minorities in a certain territory. So the old or the traditional criteria defining minorities, they were for quite some time in the history in the country settled on a certain territory, and they have become a part of the country. Wherever new minorities are determined, distinguished by those immigrants coming into the territory, and they represent one of the most complex and existing challenges actually of the diversity rights and within the mix between migration law and immigration, minority law and immigration law. What I wanted to look today is to look to several models of minority accommodation and protection to see different practices and different contexts. And very briefly to analyze the Macedonian case in Greece, we will see how much time we will have for that. And maybe with my next colleague, Natalia, we'll have a joint venture of this further on. In theory, we have different state models. These are four. The first one is nationalistic repressive model. The second is agnostic and liberal model. The third one is a promotional, and the fourth one is multinational model. So what is the first agnostic, actually liberal model talking about? It is characterized by focus on individual rights and consequent indifference between what is the collective demand of the diversity, but mostly to an individual interest. In these particular systems where countries have adopted this liberal model, of course, just let me remind you, countries don't have pure models. It is always a mix of different elements. But theoretically speaking, let's just analyze a little bit this model. In these systems, it's assumed that by law, the coincidence between nationality and citizenship, diverse groups of citizens cannot exist. So there is no difference. There is no denial of individual fundamental rights. And the liberal designs are based on the general recognition of the principles of equality. So everybody is equal and all citizens are equal. There is no discrimination regardless of their core characteristics. Then we have the second model, which is the nationalistic repressive model, and the name says it all, of course, as you can see. In this model, the state emphasized the repressive homogeneity of the population. There is no diversity in terms of ethnicity or a language. The differences in the society are not ignored, on the contrary, but they are considered to be considered from the perspective of their repression or their assimilation. So there is an official denial of minorities' existence, and there is a tendency in the society to have assimilation of all these different and diverse groups that live on the territory of the country. The next model is the promotional model, and it's characterized by the presence of dominant national group, the majority, alongside with one or two minority groups, which are the minority, actually, different ethnic, whether linguistic or religious groups. The recognition, protection, and promotion of these minorities is essential for the constitutional order and take part of its core values. So we can see in these models that it is embedded in the constitution, the protection and the framework for promotion of minorities. And on the last one is so-called multinational or multicultural model, where it's actually designed to complement and reflect the different institutional constituent groups in the country and in the organizational structure of the state, either through the territorial division of power, power sharing, specific mechanisms for protection specific groups such as proportional representation, territorial autonomy, or veto rights. And legally speaking, there are no majorities or minorities because each national community is a constitutive element of the state. And we are going to see different case studies in different countries, both from the European Union, but as well as from non-European Union countries, the Balkans. Italy is a very interesting case, and I'm very fond of the case of Italy because I have examined it for quite some time, living also there. My PhD thesis is based on the Italian protection of minorities. And Italy the constitution has three types of recognition. The famous constitution actually does not have a definition of what is a minority, but it actually established minorities or established linguistic criteria as a distinctive feature when defining the term minority. So there are three types of protection, as I said, in the 99 Law on Protection of Linguistic Historical Minorities. The first one, they're called super protette or extra protected minorities. And these are the most protected minority groups in the special autonomous regions in the Alpine or North Adriatic area, such as Trentino, Alto Adige, South Tyrol, Friuli, Venezia Giulia, Val d'Aosta, and other two, let's say, autonomous regions in the countries. The second type is those that are eventually protected, and they're listed in the law of 1999. They have a different level of protection, depends on whether the various instruments provided by law is activated or not, but the linguistic criteria is the main criteria, whether they speak a different language than the was that is spoken by the majority. And non-recognized minorities, or they're not protected anywhere, and we can surely conclude that these are Sintis. They have differentiated treatment, Sinti and Roma people, and also this can apply to some of the immigrant minority groups that live in the country. So the law of 1991 provides protection for Albanian, Catalan, Germanic, Greek, Slovenian, Croatian people, those speaking French, Franco-Provençal, Friulian, Ladin, Occitan, and Sardinian people. So you see that there is a clearly linguistic criteria when it comes to the protection. It also reaffirms the three fundamental pillars on the protection of minorities: the language criterion, the need for recognition. So if these particular groups do have a need and that there are numerous threshold that is used in order for them to be so-called super protected, and the occurring of territorial rights recognized, such as in the case of Trentino Alto Adige or a specific autonomous province of Bolzano. I will go further for the Macedonian case, which will be examined also by my colleague Natalia further, but let's just say that some find it as a multinational, some find it as a promotional model. There is a significant, of course, power sharing as well as in theory and practice. We have both linguistic and ethnic criteria for determining, and there is a proportionality that is a threshold number that is used in order to protect these minority rights. And the core also a feature of this model is equitable representation. You can see the numbers of the censuses of the last one that we had, and hopefully we will have in the near future another census. From ex-Yugoslavia or in the EU, we have also Slovenia. Slovenia distinguishes old and new minorities. And Slovenia recognized old minorities, autochthon minorities, such as the Italian on one side of the border and the Hungarian on the other side, near Maribor on the other side of the border. There is no census on nationality or ethnicity in Slovenia, so new minorities, immigrants don't have this particular right to express themselves, whether they belong to a certain ethnic or a linguistic group. And for the old minorities, these two main minorities, there is a territoriality principle. So in those territory in the Slovenian country where they actually live, they have significant rights that they can use. There is double voting system, double, as we call it in Macedonia, majority system, which is also used in the legislative body for the representative of the Italian and Hungarian minority. And there are special laws and mechanisms which allow for these minorities to take financial assistance contributions for their protection and promotion on the territory of the country. I think I am reaching a little bit of time, so this is why I'm hurrying up. And I see also Vesna and her reaction, so this is how I know whether I'm on right track. Serbia, on the other hand, some call it civic democracy, but some call it a multiculturalism, because Serbia is a very distinctive, it has a sort of a cultural autonomy, a non-territorial autonomy for minority groups. It doesn't have a territoriality as a principle, but it has a numerical consistency, a threshold that is used in order to define what are the degrees of rights and autonomy in certain sense that can be used by the different ethnicities living in the territory. As you can see, the census of Serbia also still nowadays have a free expression of the people, how they feel. So we have still Yugoslavs. Some people still feel that they are Yugoslav, even though there is no Yugoslavia anymore. So we have, as you can see in the census, a lot of different ethnicities and different language groups living in the territory. The most of those most percentage are the Roma, Hungarians, because they're well protected near Novi Sad, Bosnians as well. And we can see from the Balkans, Croatia, but also recently also in the EU. It has a constitutionally guaranteed protection for minority groups, bilateral agreements with Italians for the protection of the Italian minority in the part of Istra. It recognized, as well as in Slovenia, old and new minorities, because Italians are the old minorities, the new minorities are those coming in recent periods of time. It has also a numerical threshold for minority languages to be used in public administration and in schools, learning in a mother tongue, and also a numerical threshold for voting and representation. They are self-government units within the territory of Croatia, and each self-government unit exercise the right and the freedom to establish different protection mechanisms on the basis of the numerical consistency of these particular groups, whether they will be protected, they will have the use of language or not. In overall, we can see that all these models have also, they are different. These foreign models are different on the basis of the state policies that they actually adopt towards minorities, whether they have a strong assimilation, they have a strong integration, or they have a separation of different ethnic groups within their territory. So in the basis of whether they are recognized or not, whether they have right to have a membership or association where they can establish, how they use their language, whether they can express freely their religion and establish religious groups and churches, for example, how they can establish common language schools, not only language schools, educational facilities, or they are inserted in the state educational system, whether they are employed. You can see it on the graph without me explaining it in detail what this is particular all about. What my idea was after Natalia presentation will be is to try to examine further the Macedonian case, the North Macedonian, through a SWOT analysis. I think you're all aware of what a SWOT analysis is, and we will try, let's say, to have a brainstorm. This is a workshop, so let's be more proactive and to see what are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats in our case, but maybe with particular example, if you want to make for different models and different cases as well, you're free to do that. But I will explain that exercise further after Natalia, and we and Natalia, we're going to jointly lead that together. So this is my part. I think, yeah, maybe overlap the time. I don't know. I hope not. These are my contacts if you want to contact me in the future, and I'm glad to answer questions from the audience later. Thank you, Vesna.
Thank you, Marina. We will do the SWOT analysis after the presentation of Professor Natalia. Thank you very much for your presentation on the Blackboard. It is always interesting to hear about the minority rights, the human rights, how they are respected or not respected, although there are existing strong commitments from many sides. You mentioned the characteristics for definition of minority rights, the 4 different main models, the mixture of them also, and define minority criteria for protection of their rights in certain countries, Italy, Macedonia, Slovenia, Serbia, and Croatia. Thank you very much. So now I would like to invite our next panelist. I'm pleased to introduce her, Professor Natalia Shikova from the Law Faculty at the International Balkan University. She is my friend. She is also part of the executive board of the Center of Change Management, and you all know her from yesterday. Her main area of interest is public law, democracy, and democratization of society. She will have an interesting presentation now for us on how to build a multicultural society and how to develop and sustain dialogue among the communities. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all. Good to see you again. I'm glad that the participants are there, my students are there. It gives me a little bit more comfort when I see you all here. So I'm going to speak about how to build a multicultural society, or what are the basic premises for multiculturalism. Something that Marina was actually started to talk about, and then I will go a little bit more on detail. And after my presentation, we will go back to Marina's presentation. We will try to, let's say, enter to think about all these things that we are speaking about and put them in some kind of, let's say, analytical model that we will try to use it. It will be an experiment. We'll see how it will go. But for the beginning, my presentation, I hope you can see it. Yes, I will not take very long time. I will give you just a basic premises. First of all, about multiculturalism, is a kind of it's a model used by the democratic society to accommodate differences between the ethnic groups that are living within the borders of the state. It is the way in which modern states respond to the needs of the group in order to protect their group differentiate their rights. So the main idea is based on following. A state may seek to be neutral to the different national groups, but usually and often does privilege the majority group in a different ways. For example, drawing the internal municipal borders, establishing the use of languages, transfer of powers, national holidays, etc., which significantly reduces the power and cultural representation of the minority group in the expense of the majority. So let's say multiculturalism is a one-way transformative project in which we should engage ourselves in developing new models for democratic citizenship that is based on the ideals of the human rights, and to replace informal, undemocratic relationship of hierarchy and exclusion. It is about constructing new civic and political relations that need to overcome the deeply rooted injustice, the one that actually survived after the formal discrimination, after the reducing of the formal discrimination. So it's a kind of a project in which the society needs to change in introducing some kind of new form of identities, a new form of belongings. So first of all, multicultural policies are transformative project where actually there is a different types of policies in which encompasses different ways. For example, first of all is cultural acknowledgement and recognition of the group, economic redistribution, that means the groups can have equal access to the resources and they can utilize them, and political participation. That means the national integration is basically of the minority community is multi-phased and involving political, social and economic integration that should be connected with accompanied with different measures that should provide acceptable way to develop the, let's say, to accommodate the cultural differences with a series of governmental policies that need to change the people's attitude and promote loyalty on the state by developing different national institutions and finding practices for political socialization. So this is a, let's say, broad scope of action. So along it has been thought that only way to accomplish a citizenship is to impose a single unified model for the individuals. However, the society is a diverse one, and the ideas from 60s about the multiculturalism and on, they're thinking that actually there is a complex history, and within we have a different groups and different requirements of within the group. And the main idea is not to suppress those differentialities, but actually to frame them within the language of the human rights and the democratic accountability. So basically, it's to find a way to protect certain forms of the differences to the special legal forms of constitutional measures that will go beyond the common citizenship rights. So within the society, we have different people that are living there and different type of belongingness and expression of the identity. So basically, what is the main idea is, first of all, protection of the right of the minority groups within the laws that are prohibiting the discrimination in all spheres of society, promoting measures of affirmation and positive discrimination to increase the level of the achievement of the group, and striving for political parties, for example, to have a mixed composition, proportional representation, and etc. But when we speak about the cultural identities, and because multiculturalism, it's considered there is a lot of more than one culture existing in one society, we can see that there is a different lifestyles, attitudes, etc. And it's difficult to bring them to the level of the uniformity. We cannot make them uniform. So it's need to be recognized, those elements, and actually frame them within one the system. So each culture is unique and have different sets of characteristics. But when we speak about the culture and cultural diversity, we usually speak about the patchwork. We don't see that culture is only single and separate from the others, but we're seeing that every culture is mixture of the other countries, of the other cultures. So basically, when we create those cultures, there is a process of selection where we can see these cultural features, we will select them and we will engage them in promotion of them, performing some criteria that lead to belonging of the people to that culture. So basically, cosmopolitan people move from one culture to another, but people usually fit the best in their societal culture or culture that they're living, and where they feel that belonging and that actually express them there as a human being. When we speak about the identity, last day was about that, is about the basic question, who am I? But it is in dialogue, created in dialogue. So it's not only who am I, but actually how the others perceive me. So it is some kind of, it's a first of all subjective way of perception. And the other is multidimensional, and it is a situational fluid concept. So it means it depends on the situation and depends on the context. It depends how I see myself and how the others see me, how they can see me. How is actually situational fluid concept? If we ask ourselves, for example, who you are, you can be in some context. You go in a nightclub, you can see I'm a rocker, I'm Airbnb, etc. So basically, that identity element I'm stressing in this particular moment. But maybe there is another who you are here in this aspect. So very much depends in the situation in which you are. Usually when people feel in different contexts, they're stressing different identities, or for example, they feel that some part of their identity is under threat, they're trying to express it. So for example, when my son was young, when they asked me what I am, I would first of all say I'm mother, and then later on I'm changing that identity percent. Now I feel like a scientist, or for example, because there I need little bit support and development. So it's it depends. So, but the question is, for example, if somebody from the other planet comes and asks you, who are you? What feature you will first stress as a part of the identity? It's a part of self-reflection, what you will stress. So when we speak about the multiculturalism, first we speak as a fact. Fact meaning that there is a different group and different cultures exist in society. Second, we will speak as an ideology, meaning we have projects about it, we have an ideas, but it's on the ideological level. As a policy, meaning all those aspects need to be reflected within some concrete measures that the society undertakes. As in practice, sometimes the ideology, policy and everything, but practice is lacking, or the practice does not reflect what is intent. So basically it is one project that we always need to re-examine and reassess what is all about. It has advantages like all models and as well the disadvantages. So what are the advantages? You know, there is overcoming the barriers among the groups, overcoming the discrimination, better understanding, diversity, variety, its richness, etc. But as well, it has a negative aspects, or it is a subject of the criticism, and the criticism grows strong, let's say, in some time. So what will be the possible aspects? It is said that actually multiculturalism, it is a very strong model, but in theory. In practice, it can be some difficulties or things that need to be overcome. And what are those problems that can arise? First of all, it is the multicultural projects are a very complex one. So it's difficult to reach them. And it's sometimes it takes the root in some countries. In some countries does not manage to actually settle down in this ground. So somewhere is successful, somewhere is not. And it depends, it's basically connected with the people or a state's fear of survival from the geopolitical sense, or are they survive? Fear from the tyranny from minority, or that there will be some kind of violence of the local tyranny, or there is so many things that cannot be accommodated through the language of democracy, and especially, for example, what about the illiberal practices that are existing? So if we accept all the cultures and all the differences, that means there must be some illiberal practices like fascism, for example. What we will do with those groups? So basically, the idea is that if those practices are under influence of the liberal and democratic values, possibly eventually will change. But one of the most problematic, or let's say challenging aspect, is how to build a common identity, because multiculturalism requires common identity. It is not strictly based on these ethnical lines. So in some countries that are country of immigrants, they don't have some such strong ethno-cultural group that are historically settled, like in our countries. It's possible, for example, Australia, United States, but some other countries, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So what are the basic indicators, parameters that we need to find them in this aspect? First of all, we need to have a dialogue. That will be a democratic way for solving the problem. Then we need to have involvement and integration through all segments of public life, the acceptance of the other. So the recognition is one thing, and then acceptance and protection is another. Expression of diversity in various forms, balanced distribution, because you can have a lot of projects, but without sufficiently resources, they will be not successful. And having one common identity as a citizen's identity that will overcome, let's say, that will extend over those ethnic identities. So democracy in multicultural society assumes some kind of inclusive policy. We need to have a legal order and rule of law, and some administration that is neutral, that is not based on the blocks. Then we have a political promotion of the identities, civil values that need to be developed, and fair distribution of the resources. So there is many ways how we can do that, and there is different models, and there is a system of power sharing, the rights of political participation, polyethnical rights, then regionalism can actually accommodate that, all of that. But this is the many of the options, and the options can be combined, and the options can be a new one. So we can connect, take some aspects and create aspect that is important. And when we speak about the civil identity, need to be inclusive, need to exceed the dividing lines, and is characteristic with the countries with a developed democracy. For example, in Canada, there is a commission that works on that, on finding the elements of the identity that or the values that unify the Canadian people. They can be, I can read you some of them. They can be belief in equality and justice, belief in consultation and dialogue, support for diversity, tolerance, compassion, generosity, freedom, etc. So those are the values upon which the society needs to be engaged and unified. The very important thing is always to find a balance, and balance you need to reassess how you can reach the balance is difficult. And one of the examples here that we have of we consider that is a good example. It is a Ohrid Framework Agreement, in which actually it is a pillar of interethnic relationship in Macedonia, and this is the basic, the main idea is to establish a culture of dialogue, and it's a frame within those let's say different visions can be reflected, that in developing some society that will be eventually joined in the European Union and Euro-Atlantic community. I will just give you a short recommendation, and we can try to with Marina to make a SWOT analysis. So how we build multicultural society? First of all, the general determination need to be followed by measures. So only declaration are not enough. We need to find the points of the social unification and promotion of the one common identity. We need to find the measures that encourage integration into the society. We need to enforce the dialogue. And then all the benefits of the multiculturalism need to be promoted among all groups. That means it needs to be always high on the political agenda. I will stop here with my presentation, and I will, these are my contacts, and we can later on talk within if you have any questions, but I will give the floor to my colleague Marina, and she will make a SWOT analysis on these aspects that we were speaking about.
Okay, thank
you.
So
I will stop sharing my, yes.
Okay. Okay, I would like to share the screen and give you in chat a link to this Blackboard that we are going to use in order to make the SWOT analysis. Let me just find now the chat for you to have the link. Okay, so using the link you can access and you can open the same Blackboard that you see it shared by my side here. So what we would like to try now to attempt to assess the Macedonian case, or how the multiculturalism, or whether the Ohrid Framework Agreement established the aim to have a multicultural society. Let me remind you that before we started, that some people think that it's a promotional, that there is a significant large group here living on the territory of Macedonia, such as the ethnic Macedonians speaking a Macedonian language, Orthodox in terms of their religion. And there is one or few, like the promotional model set in my presentation, one or few minorities that are numerically smaller, such as the Albanian with a different religion and different language, Turkish minorities, Serbs, Croats living in the territory of the country. Just as a comparison, in theory and in practice, the Italian model of Trentino Alto Adige or South Tyrol is considered to be a promotional, because we have a larger significant group of German-speaking population, the German language, even though it's the same religion, with an exception, individual exceptions, of course, of people, and then a smaller Italian or Ladin also speaking group. So what we would like to do here, I think that you're all more or less familiar with how minorities are protected in Macedonia, that we have a significant portion of a population, Albanian-speaking minority, according to last census, more than 20%. Linguistic rights on the territories of the whole country, and specifically on those territories, self-government units where they are a majority, a double majority voting, power sharing mechanisms, etc., which were strived and established by the Ohrid Framework Agreement. So why won't we think about whether it's all successful or not? Do we have some weaknesses in the system? Do we have some things that we could actually develop further, and that could be mentioned in the opportunities as well? Something that can be inserted as a niche, as an instrument that is never used, but it can be used in order to enhance and better the position of the minorities, not only the Albanian, the bigger minority, but also the smaller ethnic and linguistic communities that are living on the territory. And what are the threats, not only to the minorities, but to the state as a whole, if the model is not fully implemented, if the rights are not fully protected and established. So why don't you try to, by using the plus, you see it all on the screen, there is a plus here, so you can, within your own computers, as you open the link, just insert your thoughts, your ideas, just brainstorm, don't be shy. And it's all anonymous, because if you are not logged in the Padlet platform, your name will not appear. So don't worry if you make a mistake or not, or you just, make a mistake, whether it is a strength or weakness, or opportunities or threats. So now we have a first one. Yeah, as you can see, shared values. Okay.
We can try a few minutes, like
Yes.
2-3 minutes, and then we can summarize them.
Yes. But we can all see in live what people are writing. So let's give them, without putting much pressure on participants, give them some couple of minutes. And I hope Vesna will allow us to use this time. I am a little bit afraid of Vesna, because she said, like, we have to respect the time. So
It's very nice when we respect the time.
yeah, of course. Yes. Time management is crucial.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you, Vesna. So participants, you have 5 more minutes, right? Let's say 3, then we can use the other 2 to summarize.
Excellent. Yes. To wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, don't be shy. Just let me remind you. There is no right or wrong answer. It's all brainstorming, and it's all practically how we perceive a model, or organization of a state, a framework of minorities protection. So I have 1 more minute, let's say. I see somebody used also a tool of drawing. So I see just a blue line. Somebody's very artistically in artistic mood this Saturday. So that's good.
You don't need only to write, you can draw.
That's very positive, you know.
Somebody is very creative.
Yes.
Do we have 1 more minute?
No, we can, I think we can start.
Yeah, okay. Well, as I see, you generally actually expressed strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that have been analyzed for quite some time in the Macedonian case that are mostly evident. Of course, the Ohrid Framework Agreement was the bigger strength of the minority right protection in the country since its independence from 1991, and it resolved a very important, very big, let's say, big ethnic conflict that could have escalated even further, and it was a sort of also a peace accord for some named at that period of time. And the aim of the Ohrid Framework Agreement, which is also the strength, is to promote this political participation with the power sharing mechanism that were allowed for the different minority groups to exercise. But of course, it's not all pink. The systems have and the model have many weaknesses, and also some threats that are still present, and the fears from all the citizens in the country, but also in the region. The weaknesses you have mentioned shared values between different ethnic groups. I do not quite understand how this could be. I mean, this is a little bit ambiguous statement for me. It's a shared values between different ethnic groups. I see it as a strength, actually, to be honest, because we all share in a multiculturalism, such as Natalia mentioned, we all share our values, or share our culture. This is how we integrate into one society. But maybe somebody misunderstood the column, I assume. Acceptance of minority groups. Is this a weakness in a homogeneous society? If you accept in a homogeneous nationalistic approach, let's say nationalistic model, such as I explained, if you accept minority groups, that will be against the nationalistic movement and popular movements of political parties, which actually strive to have a very homogeneous society. That could be a weakness in that particular case, but fortunately, I guess we are not that kind of model. Possibility for misuse by politicians in order to gain political points. Very true, and it has been seen so far in all the elections that we have politicized society in according to ethnic lines. So that has been also mentioned by our first speaker panelist, that we don't have ideological political parties because we have populist parties, and one of the populist rhetoric is also ethnic lines. We will protect your rights. We are the superior, and just vote for us. So this is the rhetoric in brief that is used. In the artistic part of the opportunities of this SWOT with the blue line, we have employment opportunities for smaller minority groups as well, as we can see, or for those minority groups that are underrepresented in the employment in the public administration. It gave Ohrid and gives still an equitable representation for the minority groups to be equally represented on the basis of their percentage in the composition of the society, also in the public administration system. But sometimes, and most of the times, this led to a very disputable situations, and neglected the merit system, or whether you are compatible to do that job or not whether you belong to a certain ethnic community or not. Greater collaboration and sharing of ideas, projects, and events between all the Euro-Mediterranean countries program together to create a path together. Of course, also striving to go to the EU membership, that could lead a very also further opportunity, not only for the state, but also for the minorities to be able to raise their voice and to be accommodated, protected further. Involvement the minority groups in the process of governance and the first step for building strong democratic values. Very well said. And I do really agree that that could be used more often in the rhetoric, especially of political parties. Unfortunately, as in every model that I've mentioned, the fourth one, there is always a threat of separation, ethnic cleansing, separation, and ethnic division of territory. And this is also perceived as a greater threat, not only in Macedonia, but in the whole Western Balkan countries. Historically speaking, that was very proved to be so. And it's not that, and I hope so, that won't be the case in the future, and that we will have more peaceful resolution of any conflicts, not only on ethnic grounds. Thank you for the participants for putting this also artistic feel, but also their feedbacks and thoughts. And Vesna, I will stop here, promising.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Marina.
Thank you as well from my side.
Yes, thank you both for this interactive work for everyone. Thank you for your contributions. I see in the chat there are some questions. Please write your questions in the chat and we will address them later. Now I would like to ask our last panelist from this block of presentations to join us. I would like to invite Professor Mirjana Maleska. Welcome, Professor. We are very happy to have her here with us today. She is currently professor at the Doctoral School of Political Science at the University of Cyrillus and Methodius in Skopje. She has been and still is part of many research projects in the field of interethnic relation, confidence building in multicultural societies, functioning of the political and party system, democracy, public opinion, political culture, and so on. As I'm probably most experienced here in this section, she would wrap up this part of the workshop and we'll talk about the revolutions from 1989, about the history and legacy aspects. Professor Marina, the floor is yours. Mirjana, I'm sorry. We cannot hear. Just unmute yours. Yes. Thank you, Professor Mirjana.
1989, history and legacy. The collective memory, or if you wish, historical narratives, influence attitudes, decisions, the approaches to our contemporary problems, and are not given once for all. They are constructions, constantly re-examined, rebuilt, reloaded, retold in the light of new knowledge and insights. That is why debates like this one are very valuable. I did not hesitate at all what to talk about today, the 1989 revolutions. Out of curiosity, I asked Neda and some of her colleagues, what do they remember? The answer made me laugh, honestly. They remember something completely different that I remember. And well, this is a great opportunity for participants from different generations, from different European countries, professors, students, and activists to sit down at the same table and discuss the legacy of Europe's past. And I'm thankful to organizers to be here today. Professor Maleski and Professor Frčkovski yesterday spoke a little bit about 1989 and the meaning of that year for the people behind the Iron Curtain. And let me to say a few words more about that, what I remember. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation just for students to see how dramatic, how important this year was for history of Europe, for our history and legacy. So revolutions of 1989. I'm right here. Okay. Why I chose 1989? Because that was a year of dramatic changes, that was a year of revolutions that brought fundamental changes to Europe, a year of the rise of democracy, a year of great challenges, enthusiasm, hunger for changes, a year of great joy, but also a year of a lot of tears, a year of velvet revolution and bloody as well, a year of unprecedented and unrepeatable events. I put some pictures here just to remind you that of some events. Just a moment. 3rd of February, Soviet troop withdrawal of Czechoslovakia. 6th of February, Solidarity, you see Lech Walesa here, and Polish government start round table talks. 18th February, the Polish government declares that Stalin repressive machinery, the secret police NKVD, not Nazi Germany, was responsible for 1940 Katyn forest massacre when nearly 22,000 Polish military officers and intelligentsia were executed. 7th of April, 7th of April, next, yes, 7th of April, you see here Lech Walesa. 7th of April, Solidarity is legalized, signs agreement on elections in which it can contest 35% of seats in Sejm, all in Senate. 15 April to 4 June. If you recognize on the picture, students protested on the Tiananmen Square in Beijing, asking for democratic reform. The army with tanks put the end to the protest, killing an estimated 2,600 people. So the freedom is very costly. 25th of April, Soviet forces begin leaving Hungary and multi-party system was introduced in this country. 2nd of May, the Hungarian government leaves barbed wire, symbolically named the Iron Curtain, along border with Austria. 7th of July, Gorbachev tells Warsaw Pact leaders they can choose their own road to socialism. 22nd of August, Gorbachev urges Polish communists to join coalition government with Solidarity. On the first non-communist government in Eastern Europe, just a moment, could you repeat this picture with Gary Cooper? Do you recognize Gary Cooper? It was very interesting poster plaque for me. That first non-communist government in Eastern Europe since 1848 was elected in Poland, and on the election poster you see Gary Cooper calls the voters to vote for Solidarity at high noon. This picture is from his famous film At High Noon. Okay. The Hungarian next picture, yes, in August, Russia is formed first opposition in the parliament led by politician Yeltsin, and the nuclear physicist you see on the picture here, dissident Nobel laureate and activist for human rights, Andrei Sakharov. In September, more than 50,000 East Germans flee to Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. Then, 10th of September, Hungary opens border with Austria, allowing East Germans to flee. 7th of October, Gorbachev visits East Germany, urges Erich Honecker to adopt reforms. 27th of October, Warsaw Pact members endorse right of self-determination, renouncing Brezhnev doctrine. This is famous so-called fraternal kiss between Brezhnev and Honecker. 9th of November, Berlin Wall fall. 4th of December, Warsaw Pact condemns 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia. 25th of December, Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife were executed in Romania in front of the camera. 29th of December, Václav Havel, writer and dissident, becomes a first democratic president of Czechoslovakia. Next year, 8th of September, Macedonia declared its independence. First competitive elections in the country history were held on November 1990. Thank you. I'll continue then a little bit later. Okay. I just want to show you how dynamic was, how excited was 1899 revolutions and how important for Europe. The reasons for the profound and relatively rapid changes in political power and political system behind Iron Curtain in 1989 are to be found in the long-standing political, social, and economic repressions, the political incompetence of the ruling elites, and the exhausting struggle for domination between Western and Eastern Bloc that has caused material and spiritual impoverishment of the society of Central and Eastern Europe. Gorbachev, the leader of Soviet Union, understood well the situation and introduced some reforms. That was the beginning of a big bang. The situation ends up with mass revolt of citizens against the government and its holders. This year, I was worked at a scientific institution in Skopje, and I remember the atmosphere which could be described as incredible optimism of that time and hunger for change. Where does this urge come from? Because we in Yugoslavia, for example, did not live badly, nor was the system as repressive as in the other Eastern Bloc countries. We had constitutionally guaranteed social rights, self-government, and so on. The Yugoslav model of socialism was so flexible that we could buy and read Western literature, travel, or work abroad. And yet, we sought and expected the expansion of social rights with political rights and freedoms, such as freedom of opinions, freedom of speech, freedom of association in political parties, the right to free and democratic election, and so on. The debate in the university circles in 1989, so we can see now the slide, was held between proponents of two opposing views. Next one. Not this one. Debate in political circles in 1989 was held between two proponents of two opposite views around the question: is a stable multi-party democracy possible in Eastern Europe after the fall of the one-party communist system? Those who believe that those who believe, we are going here. Okay. Those who believe that Eastern Europe had no presupposition for stable democracy, for example, Professor Ken Jovic in his article, The New Democratic World Order in Journal of Democracy, said that it's impossible in Europe to develop democracy because there is no middle class, there is no political previous democracy or democratic experience, no civil culture, and so on. On the other side, for example, professor, he's from Italian origin, but he's American professor Giuseppe Di Palma. In his text, Why Can Democracy Succeed in Eastern Europe?, believes that democratic rules of the game can be matter of agreement. what started as an attempt by the old communist regime behind the Iron Curtain to make smaller reforms just to prolong their lives, took an unwanted and quite different direction from the first initiative. Let's see what is the next slide. Yeah, you see here Professor Kenjovic and Giuseppe Di Palma. After 30 years, it is clear that many of these fears and reservation coming from university circles, professors from university circles, and other, of course, were proved justified, and that the new democracies had, and some of them still have difficult times facing nationalism, first of all, and populism. But in 1898, there was no room for choice. What started as an attempt by the old communist regime behind the Iron Curtain to make smaller reforms just to prolong their life took an unwanted and quite different direction from the first initiatives. Yesterday, we started with the debate of the relationship between democratic consolidation of the former communist countries, especially Macedonia, and lack of long democratic tradition. Let me say that I have a little bit different opinion. We have some democratic legacy, at least of protest, dissidence, or subversive artistic expression. For example, my generation took part in the massive protest of students, workers, intelligentsia, etc., against increasingly violent state repression in Europe and all around the world in 1968. In Czechoslovakia, for example, the Communist Party leader Dubček promoted some democratic reforms known as Prague Spring. In Yugoslavia, on 2nd and 3rd June 1968, student demonstration in Belgrade were the first mass protests in the country after the Second World War, and they spread throughout the country. I was protesting in Skopje with other students. Did we know what we wanted? Not clearly. We criticized everything, but our demands were mainly for better quality of life, better education, political freedom, or freedom for speech, etc. I noticed that the highest officials from Macedonian Communist Party, for example, present at our meetings, looked at the students' criticism approvingly. Later on, I understood why. They belonged to the so-called liberals in the party, and they need support against the dogmatic party wing. As a result, some democratic reforms were introduced, and the following years we were living our Yugoslav Spring. Freedom of expression in all artistic forms was respected and encouraged. American professor Peter Liotta, for example, was so impressed by Yugoslav rock music that he devoted 2 articles publishing in our journal, New Balkan Politics, on these topics. In the role of art, he says, the rock and roll expressed the idea of freedom through a loud, pulsating, expressive sound. It was in fact a form of liberation. In this of variety and complexity of life in former communist countries, I would like to mention an example of so-called subversive art. For example, books like The Captive Mind of the writer, poet, and academic Czesław Miłosz, described by the historian Norman Davis as devastating study, which totally discredited the cultural and psychological machinery of communism. Or subversive Polish film, and film directors like Andrzej Wajda, Krzysztof Krzysłowski, Krzysztof Zanussi, Roman Polanski, described in the article of film critics Martin Smith in Socialist Review with the following words: Polish directors, actors, and film crew worked under difficult conditions, under censura, but amazingly, they were still able to make some of the greatest film of 20th century. Was the optimism, expectation, and hopes from 1989 fulfilled? Obviously, they were put too high. The biggest disappointment was aggressive nationalism, and as a result of that, bloody dissolution of Yugoslavia. International mediation wasn't efficient or successful, and the federation has begun to disintegrate through a chaotic process in which federal government in Belgrade lost its role, and in an impartial center for reconciliation of interests of each nation, and each nation group took security and arms into its own hands. One of the bloodiest territorial and ethnic war in Europe since World War II broke out in Bosnia and Herzegovina. American journalist David Roth, in his Pulitzer Prize book End Game, first attracted world's attention on the massacre in Srebrenica, where nearly 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed. Terrifying example of ethnic cleansing led by Colonel General of the Army of Republika Srpska, Ratko Mladic, who recently was sentenced to life imprisonment by International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. Between the 70s and 80s, Praga Spring was crushed by the Soviet tanks. Yugoslav Spring was cut by political means. President Tito understood that too much liberalization will endanger his power, and he took an offensive battle against the liberal fraction of the Yugoslav Communist Party and won this battle. The liberals, that liberal wing in the party were expelled from their position in the party and the state, and opportunists and party bureaucrats came to power once again. Ironically, some years later, in 1989, these same people were put in a situation against their will to write and promote the rules under which the Communist Party lost its power on the first democratic election in Macedonia in 1990. The new chapter, not necessarily easier, has started. What is the legacy of this year of 1989? Speaking about the legacy of 1989, I hope it will be remembered how incredible, unpredictable, exciting, dynamic, widely connected in Europe and in the world, sometimes joyful, more often painful, was the historical and political storm of progress in Europe after the World War II. During 1989 revolutions, democracy spread throughout Central and Eastern Europe, and Europe united. Some of these changes, such as the fall of Berlin Wall, promised a bright future. Some, such the execution of dictator Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania, or the breakup of Yugoslavia, the civil war, and the aggression against Bosnia, savage ethnic cleansing, etc., serve as a reminder that the path to democratic changes and what we have today and what we spoke today would not be easy. New democracies facing mainly with nationalism and populism. At the end, I would like to say a few words about the destiny of the rock group, about who our colleague Peter Liotta wrote, Bielo Dugme. In 1987, the group recorded the songs where intentionally or unintentionally the end of Yugoslavia was predicted. The song was entitled Spit and Sing Yugoslavia, My Yugoslavia, and the song became extremely popular. The frontman of the group, Goran Bregovic, warns politicians, spit and sing Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia, get up and sing, let them hear you. He who does not listen to the song will hear storm, and the storm really came. But it is very sad that at the moment of great victory of democracy, at the beginning of 90s, it was forbidden for Belo Dugme to play in Slovenia, for example, because of their Yugoslav nationalistic feelings. Therefore, let's remember as our legacy, a European legacy, that protection of values like tolerance or freedom or expressions is an unfinished process. Stefan Hessel, a diplomat, ambassador, writer, concentration camp survivor, French resistance member, said to young people that is also a great legacy, and I completely support a rebel. Search and find a little, and you will find what to rebel against and to whom to rebel against. Indifference is the worst. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this detailed presentation. We heard and saw many important dates and images remarking the 1990s, and definitely many of them will stay in our memory as a visual perception. I see a few questions in the chat. I propose we continue with the second section now, and then we can answer the questions at the end of this workshop. So in this sense, our next guest is Professor Aleksandra Petrushevska-Ristovska. She has a master degree in graphic design and PhD from the Department for Cultural Studies from the Institute for Macedonian Literature. She has prepared a very interesting presentation for us today. She will focus on the spaces of oblivion. She has staged already several independent and group exhibitions in the past years in New York, Berlin, Amsterdam, Vienna, and Beirut, and several in Skopje at the Museum of Art of Contemporary Art. So I won't take it long. We are eager to see your presentation. Professor Aleksandra, please take the floor.
Thank you very much for your introduction. It is very interesting that I will change the track of this conference. We were talking about politics, talking about ideologies, power, budget, but I'm an artist and I would like to put my contribution in this subject because my interest in art is how actually the politics and the society influence into the art and architecture in general. So I was invited to talk about my last project, which was actually the reflection of these communist buildings into today point of view. So I was dealing with this time distance, and I was trying to read this architecture from the 70s and 80s, how we can read from this perspective. Just shortly to just to remind how art and architecture is important in all the aspects of political and social livings, because we can understand the art as a visual record or reflection of the society. And if we take the examples from the antique times where we don't have any visual record like video camera or photo camera, we understand the political ideology through art and architecture. So we can see that sometimes art is a tool of politics and aristocracy through the history, and at that time the art didn't have its freedom to speak about other truths, but nowadays it's different with contemporary art and contemporary point of view. So we can find different readings through art and architecture. Now I would like to share some images. And my concentration in the past 3 years was Skopje and this brutal architecture, what is talking about these communist times and this ideology and how we are understanding nowadays. If we see around Skopje, we have architecture from the antique times. This is a building from the Skopje aqueduct from the Roman times, but still even the experts are not sure if we are talking about Roman time or Ottoman time. But let's consider that we have this aqueduct from the Roman times. I'm sorry. Just to open the image once more. You see the product? Just, I don't know why I cannot show. Okay. The next thing that we have architecture in Skopje is this old bazaar and old architecture from the Ottoman Empire. That actually the city separated in two parts into the old and new part of the city. Which is divided with this famous bridge, which is called Stone Bridge from the Ottoman area and the old bazaar. So what we can read from our past is these familiar buildings from antique and Ottoman periods, which are actually recognized not only in Macedonia and Skopje, but also around Balkans. And the next thing, we have a huge jump into the architecture style. From the Ottoman period, we are jumping to the new way of architecture. Because in '63 we had a terrible earthquake in Skopje, and everything we have from architectural point of view was destroyed, and we jumped directly to the modernity. So this is a very interesting allegory if we are talking about from political and social point of view, how we are jumping from one ideology to some very, very distant ideology in the modernity. Actually, this happened in many areas, not only in architecture and politics, but in the whole understanding of our living here. At that times, it's 63, the 60s, we were living in socialistic and communistic periods. And at the time was very trendy in the world to be designed in this brutalistic style, which is not only visible in Yugoslavia, but also we can find brutalism in England, in London, and some parts of Russia and the ex-communistic countries. Our first project for this brutalistic city that we need to build a new modern city in Skopje was projected by the architect, the Japanese architect, Kenzo Tange. And he actually created a very interesting and very functional structure for the city. So at that time, we have a very bright ideology, very interesting time for living from every aspects. And this I understand from the books we read and the stories were told, because I'm born, my generation was in the early 80s after the death of Tito. And my generation was born in Yugoslavia, but after that we were living in the new system, like former Republic of Macedonia, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and then we became a Republic of Macedonia. So my generation usually are telling a joke that we were living in the 4 different countries with 4 different names. In the term that for the past 40 years, we are living some kind of transition and only hearing about the past. So if we see this concept of brutalism and this concept of type of living in socialism, we can talk about some kind of nostalgia or some kind of idealism that actually our generation is living in. But if we are talking about reality, how this ideology of brutalism and communism is functioning right now, it's totally different situation. So I start first like a video and photographical research about this architecture from the 70s and 80s, in what situation is nowadays, because the main buildings in Macedonia which need to be working with the crucial question in our society about culture, politics, and other crucial questions that we need to develop as a society are built in this period from communism. After that, after the 80s, I cannot say that we have some so much crucial buildings which can open and develop this interesting question for our future. So I started with the train station in Skopje, which was designed by Kenzo Tange, and just to see how is the situation right there. I was very much inspired, and really I felt this nostalgic atmosphere, because mainly these buildings that I was talking about nowadays are very empty and disappearing in a way. But we are not thinking about the way how to maintain or how to conduct what we already have, but we are concentrating in something new. Mainly the buildings that we have nowadays in Skopje are concentrated for like malls, for shopping malls or living buildings, but we are actually forgetting the main questions. So if you see the first situation in the train station, where it needs to be very crowded and we need to have connecting between cities and countries, our train station is totally abandoned, and the only creatures you can find there are pigeons. There are no any people, no, it's totally abandoned, and it reminds me in some of the scenes of Blade Runner, or these dystopical movies which can explain the dystopical future. So this is how I felt about living in Skopje and reading the communism from this distance. And when I finished with the photo research, I started questioning questioners with the people who are working there, their thoughts, why these buildings are empty, and why we don't have maintenance, and why we don't have something that can keep moving us forward, but we are still opening the question about the past. So then I start this painting concept, painting process and project 2.5 years ago. So I tried to show different view, different perspective from this ideology. You can see the reality is totally different when you see the buildings in reality, when you see the paintings are more bright and colorful, but also I wanted to catch the moment of this dystopian emptiness that is happening. But you can understand this when I'm talking about dystopia, not only in architecture and painting view, but also what I really want to show is the reality. Because when the audience are seeing the paintings, somehow they can share the feelings of this nostalgia. Everybody are talking about the past, and I put the title of this project Spaces of Oblivion, together with Vladimir Jančevski. He was writing the text of, he was creator of the exhibition, or Forgotten Future. So what we are doing, I have a feeling what we are doing in these questions, that we are still all the time going back in the past. How was in the past 30 years? How was in the past 40 years? How good was to live in communism? And I'm pointing here that we don't need to forget the future, but we definitely need to overcome some questions in our society, even though it's about identity, even though it's about the communist question, how was there? And we need to find a new point of view. So finding this point of view, finding this new point of view for the future is, it will give a courage to the young generations to implement their new ideas. I'm working in multinational university, and there are so many students from different parts of these areas. We are totally all the nationalities from the Balkans in one place. And we are using the English language. And this is, I understand that this is the first step when we overcome many of the questions. And the second thing, when we are talking about art, this is the most international language. We can see that when we overcome some questions, we can talk about the essence, about the future. So my point of view is that we need to concentrate to some other question, just to overcome the questions of identity, of politics, but maybe we can change the focus into something else, like science, technology, mechanics, engineering, architecture. And these kind of questions will give us new perspective for the future, because like everywhere, there are so many bright and intellectual young people around that can concentrate on new questions, and just to forget and overcome the questions that are causing us problems for the past, not only 40, but maybe hundreds years in the Balkans. The next painting is depicting a part of our national university library. It's the biggest library in Macedonia, in Skopje. It is also a building from the 70s, from these brutalistic times. And what I find there is the same emptiness like in the train station. The main question when you are staying in the train station actually is giving an answer, where are the people? And the answer is that everyone is looking the freedom into the western parts of the countries. And this is also very interesting, how you are seeing the freedom in the West, and you cannot find it here. That actually, I think we are all together stuck in some questions that are not in the right place. So all these places like the National Library and the train stations has an idea for the bright future, that we need to develop here crucial question for nice living for the people, not only to talk about ideology and politics, but as we can see that this idea for the future, it's not working nowadays. And also I went to the, this is the Faculty of Architecture, and I titled this painting, What Did We Leave Behind? And actually it's a very crucial question, what we are leaving behind nowadays, our generation. If we all leave the Balkans and we all leave to the Western countries, what we are going to leave as an ideology and as a questions for the future generations. And also I have an interviews, and this is the Macedonian Building for Scientists and Arts, when we need to open a very crucial questions about the future, but as well, these buildings is mainly stayed empty, and unfortunately, we are not dedicating to the right question and just to solve them. So as you see from my paintings, I try to depict something that is very subjective, but it's talking about very objective and very public questions. I understand that through discussions with many of my colleagues, and also um, many of our colleagues and young people who actually are spreading and sharing the same thoughts about the situations of these crucial institutions in Macedonia. This is another example of the train station in Skopje, and another picture of the library. It's I know with this digitalization we all used to dedicate to PDF books and to use computers, but still this is a national library, and unfortunately I've been there so many times and situation is not the best. Unfortunately, these places of national libraries and buildings of again of Macedonian science and art needs to be at least full with young people, and I was expecting to see more life and maybe more voices that can raise the questions of the future. This is also a building from Macedonian television, which is it was the highest building and very crucial point in the past for medias and sharing the informations and also maintain the main questions. But only we can see now is disrespect. This is title of Inside the Essence, and it's mainly connected with this essence questions that we are trying to forget in some place. The one-time ideology read from our present time obtains new concept of viewing the old concepts. This interior of a public space causes uniting with the past, that is imagination for the future. Dystopian emptiness in which times of existence are blended. The interior objects that we now see most often spark with a nostalgic feeling that they have not changed, and yet in the same time they have. Such idealized memory, which could be approximately explained as a most sincere moment of existence, presents a unique artistic structure that for any individual represents an intimate corner fragment from the private, their own and personal memory. And what I can see that most of the audience find themselves in these paintings is that they visit and they created a personal memory from the past, but no one was finding this memory from today, from the now moment. This phenomenon of reviving to the past will be seen in many authors, not only in idealized form, but with idea of the same various theories and merits. Such a situation is determined with artistic shape, visual record, and what would be reflected of the past. We can see in many movements in art, the artists were reviving and finding inspiration in the past. I will mention that during the Roman period, the artists were finding inspiration in the Greek sculptures and the Greek aesthetic. During the Romanticism, we also have inspiration from the Greek mythology. So we can see that the art usually can find this inspiration, can find this moment, this idea from the past, and can put in the new context. So how we can find this inspiration from the past, from the 70s and 60s, and put or developed or continue this idea from the past. We can change the track, of course, like I'm changing the track with the art in these political subjects that we have. But I think that we can be more creative, and we can implement some new ideas that I mentioned before, like technology, science, and opening the borders, and also closing some questions that are causing us so much problems, even wars into the Balkans, a lot of destructions. We saw a lot, and we suffered a lot for the past 20 years. The architecture of the interior comprehended and see from the two aspects of functionality and creation speak themselves about our need and process of thinking. Through their poetics, they articulate the time of their creation. We only have to perceive them with the witness and the fact that the thought could be transferred via unlimited sources of expression, not only verbally or textually. How the space would sustain itself, substitute ahead, and how we can understand all. Illustrating the space have been understood and put it in the physical frame of the material world, which extend and execute with the distance from the past. In such a space, each one of us creates their own context and generates emotions and basis from the personal experience. So art is usually talking and it's connected with emotions as well. I wanted to give a new aspect of these questions, because if we ask the people, which sometimes are experiments in this ideology, they are always connected with some places and ideas connected with the emotions as well. So you can also see that I really try to talk about the interior design, not the exterior, how the brutalism is looking from outside, but from inside, with the purpose of these inside questions. And also some details that can remind us of all these crucial places. So recently I finished with the project. All these projects finished with exhibition in the National Gallery of Macedonia. And for those who are from Skopje, they can still visit it. It's still open. And also this exhibition and this project was presented in Lithuania. I can see, I'm very grateful that many of the people see this in positive context. I'm trying to not to criticize, but just to stay objective and to talk about the visual reflection and reminds from this ideology and from this time. So with this final picture, I will finish with my presentation, and also I'm open for some questions. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Professor Alexandra. This was really emotional and different, interesting presentation. Thank you very much for those paintings and pictures and the overall presentation, your points of view of the particular pictures. I personally believe that the visual effects stay longer in our human memory, so we will all definitely remember at least some of the pictures. Now we will move to our next guest, the researcher Vladimir Anchevsky. Janczewski, I'm sorry, he is working simultaneously in the field of contemporary art and visual studies. His interests are in interdisciplinary art practices and image theory, art and politics interventions in public space, etc. He has participated in numerous projects, exhibitions, and public discussions, and today he will present us provocative images against contemporary art interventions in public space. After his presentation, we will go with the answers of the questions in the chat. Vladimir, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction. Just to share the screen. I hope you can see it. This presentation is based on a research titled Who's Provoking Who? Contesting religious images in public domain, developed since 2015 as a joint project with my colleague Safet Ahmeti. I will be focusing on specific contemporary art interventions that criticize, comment, and interpret religious symbolism, which have stirred up unruly passions, leading to fierce public debate or even violent reactions. Here we have two cases of benign artistic criticism, hence all the more telling about the complex situation in which they have been considered problematic and consequently have been removed. David Friedberg, in the French preface to his book Power of Images, reflects upon his central themes of censorship and iconoclasm becoming so timely at the end of the 80s. From the end of 1989, all over Eastern Europe, the images of the old communist regime began to come down. The result was one of the most intense and widespread iconoclastic movements that Europe had seen since the French Revolution. One of the overturns or inversions of the end of century's iconoclasm toward the communist past was reflected in the reinvigoration of religious iconophilia manifested intensively in the public domain. After the disintegration of the multinational socialist Yugoslav Federation, its most visible opposition, the country's religious institutions, celebrated what they perceived as a religious revival, manifested by visibly increased crowd attendance at massive liturgical events. As Vjekoslav Periza suggests in his book Balkan Idols, the Western media as well cheered a return of God after the fall of Marxist utopia, where churches were viewed as locomotives of democratization and as proven anti-communist natural allies of the West. He continues by saying that the religious institutions at hand, as always, were and still are indulging in the two primary feelings of ownership, the territorial ownership and the ownership of a nation at any price. The years of separation anxiety during Tito's rule have created a historic hunger for regaining power. What we are witnessing today is a result of practicing the regained power is religion invading all areas of society. So following Friedberg's main goal, it is important to touch on some complex questions of how to speak about those relations between images and people upon which context acts, analyzing the misreadings or interpretations that lead to banning, covering, and even erasing of some supposedly problematic and offending images from the public domain. As these acts give rise to a new confusion regarding the definition of iconophilia and iconophobia, as well as to what constitutes iconoclasm, we utilize Horst Bredekamp's notion that the iconoclasts are the real iconophils. It is through negative dialectics, as Bredekamp has suggested, that one may detect the hidden powers of a work of art much more clearly than through an affirmative approach. It is via this process of deconstructing the forces external to the artwork, and then by reconstructing its inner workings, that we theorize the power of images and their role as a potential societal corrective. In October 2009, near the place a Christian church was supposed to be erected, the artist Igor Toshevsky drew a cross-like shape near the main square in Skopje as part of the exhibition Inner World, organized in cooperation with the Museum of the City of Skopje. The featured work is part of his larger ongoing conceptual work entitled Territories. first shown in 2004, it involved two stages: the declaration of the free territory carried out by means of advertising with posters, billboards, and pamphlets, and the actual execution of the borderlines in accordance with the terrain. Usually, yellow water-based paint has been used that would fade in a period of few weeks, and photographs are taken to thoroughly document the activities of the passerbys within the territory, thus providing a report on the short history of this temporary state of art. However, soon after the artwork was drawn, it was hastily removed by the city authorities, or to be more precise, it was covered with bitumen and thus excluded from the public space. In a public statement, a city representative briefly referred to misunderstanding in regard to the visual presentation as obtained in the documentation. In other words, they were not expecting a cross to appear, and especially not on that particular location. As the artist Toshevsky himself explains, all the required permissions were properly obtained by the city authorities. The particular location, he says, was marked by a sign which, seen under a certain angle, could be described as an outline of a specific figure. In the permission requirement, he continues, not by any means had been written or alluded that he had an intention of drawing a rabbit or any other form on that location. In the opposite, it had been explicitly explained that the point of territories consists in drawing a yellow line simulating a borderline. What remained after the act of erasing the artwork are numerous unanswered questions. For example, who authorized the deletion of the artwork without even informing the artist or the organizer? The artist and part of the public treat this kind of action as a form of censorship. Still, the main question is what initiated the misinterpretation of symbols and their context, and what does the artwork reveal in reverse? As reported in the Religious Freedoms Report of 2008, while religious communities face challenges regarding restitution of religious properties, the government, in a closed-door meeting on January 22, 2008, agreed to fund construction of an Orthodox church in the main city square of Skopje. The Ministry of Culture publicly invited architectural design competition of a new Orthodox church on the main city square. Due to country's secular constitution, such an idea promoted by the Ministry of Culture initiated reactions among many. The ministry immediately changed its proposal by introducing a reconstruction of an older church, Saints Constantine and Elena, built in 1926, partly destroyed in the devastating earthquake from the 1963 and later completely dismantled by the authorities. This act triggered even more reactions since neither the third place winning architectural project was a reconstruction of the church at stake, nor it had anything in common with the morphology of the previous building. Furthermore, it was projected to be erected some 150 meters away from the original church. The government then started an advertisement campaign in order to obtain a public confirmation, which was based upon assumptions that the church signifies a public space, reconstruction signifies Europeanization, the central square should represent national identity, and so on. The falsity of the overall campaign produced a further division and also contributed to deepening all distinct religious divisions. In the last instance, the location for the church was displayed 2 more times until it finally occupied the forecourt of the army house several hundred meters south of the main square. In June 2012, the artist duo OPA, Obsessive Possessive Aggression, the artists Slobodanka Stevčevska and Denis Reginovski, took part in an exhibition called Visual Industries, organized by Ars Acta, as one of the events of Skopje Creativa Festival held in Skopje. The curators invited 10 artists to design an advertisement for an imaginary product intended to be presented in public space on one of the 10 billboards rented for that purpose. OPA's work, titled Solution, was conceived clean even the most inaccessible places, juxtaposing a detail from a fresco painting from the Church of St. Demetrius with the bottle of a cleaner and the aforementioned slogan. Immediately the official opening about who and why decided to remove it from public view. It was 2 months earlier, on April 8, 2012, 1 week before Orthodox Easter, that the frescoes in the Church of St. Demetrius in Skopje appeared to have changed colors overnight, thus attracting thousands of Orthodox believers to witness what they believed to be a miracle. The gold halos around the painted saints of the church became brighter overnight, local clergy claimed. The Archbishop Stefan, as well as the Macedonian Prime Minister Nikola Gruevski, immediately visited the church, but neither of them gave any statement. The only official gave a statement interpreting the event was Valentina Božinovska, the head of the Commission for Religious Communities, in an interview for Channel 5 TV, where she said, "This is a message that we must immediately return to moral values, family and children, to preserve ourselves from the decadence we are facing." While believers have been praising God and the patron saint, others say the sudden change in the frescoes might have been caused by a chemical reaction or was even a deliberate hoax designed to attract people's attention. Meanwhile, the Conservation Center of Skopje has taken samples from the frescoes and said it is conducting analysis to see whether some atmospheric changes or change in the wall humidity might have been the cause. There is no answer to this day. So the situation in Macedonia at that moment was very different from what is described in James Elkin's book titled On the Strange Place of Religion in Contemporary Art, saying that the only way religion can get in the art world is through criticism of religion and religious practices and irony. In countries where those can exist as separate domains, it is understandable why Elkins focuses on the autonomous elitist art world. Both of the cases, and especially considering the way the images conveyed through the artworks were removed from public space without explanation or direct responsibility for the decision, shows that it was not about the religion in the first place, but it was rather about the complex phenomenon of politicization of religion. From the aforementioned chain of events, it can be said that the Macedonian Orthodox Church, in cooperation with and supported by the state authorities, was conducting a process of open desecularization through insistence on dominant and ever-increasing visual presence in the public sphere. Not to confuse the role of the church and the state, it is important to stress what Slavoj Žižek says about contemporary fundamentalism and politicization of religion. Quote, "It is not a simple return to the past. Thus today, regarding the politicization of religion is not simply religion invading politics, but populist tendencies themselves coming in guise of religion, exerting power most clearly in the public space. Forcing a population to venerate their fetishes, they are not only religious, but according to them, constitutive to the national identity, they have created a situation in which we are being provoked and dare to challenge them." But there are different motivations behind diminishing a political power by assailing its symbols. While the examples given indeed do seek for attention, they do not do it as an end in itself, but in order to involve the other side into a public debate. Even more, this and attempt to build high awareness artists who seriously understand the socio-political specificity, the media they use, and the contents they are conveying, understanding of the dynamics of the elements in a particular image act. David Friedberg is right when he says that the most important lesson to be learned from the study of iconoclasm is that the location of the primary source of power is not in the image itself, but rather in its arising. It is arising from the dialectics of its relation with the beholder, and that is why it is of utmost importance, as he says, to account for the complex and interlocking relationships between people and images, for the interplay between making and seeing, appearance and perception, intention and response, between the putative autonomy of the object and the context of seeing. And furthermore, that is why in our case, it is more proper to discuss the strange place of contemporary art in the era of religious revival in the context of what can be described as a process of desecularization, especially when we are dealing with regulation and use of public space. That is why we think important to discuss the emancipatory potential of critical action and intervention in the public space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you very much for sharing with us this presentation and these images and your thoughts on them. I propose now to go and answer with the questions and then go with the last but not least panelist for today. Please open the chat and see the questions. We have, I think, 5 or 6 questions. We can start with the last one, which is question for Professor Ristevska. Do you believe that nowadays, through art, the youth has become more interested in and conscious of what happened in the past? Please be short and precise in your answer.
Okay,
Thank you very much in advance.
This is very interesting questions, and I will connect it with nowadays living our habits. So since we have social medias, we are somehow going back to the image and to the picture. So we understand more, and we are just shortly seeing the pictures, the images that we are sharing. And we have another communications nowadays, which was very similar to the Egyptian type of living. So they were communicated through pictures. And also I can see that during the 2000s till now, we have new way of communication through the image. So yes, I do believe that sometimes that image can transfer the ideology and can transfer the whole theory much faster. Can you hear me? Because my internet is very low. So this visual communication, we can see it in graphic design, in the science outside the city. And somehow we are getting used on this kind of communication more than to listen and to read. It's my opinion. So the question, the answer will be that it's much faster transfer of the idea, and they are more conscious not only to the paintings but also to the images they are seeing from the past, and also the buildings, because the brutalism became very interesting about the youth generations nowadays. So this will be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Alexandra. The next one is for Professor Natalia Shikova. I will not read the question, not to lose time. Please, if you see the question, just give us your answer.
Thank you. My internet fell down, but I do remember the question. As for the implementation of the laws, in general, we have problem with the implementation of the laws. So the policies are reflected in the laws. It's another question, are they well thought or not? But in general, we have a problem with the implementation and rule of law, not only for the laws that are related to minorities, but laws in general. But still, I can see some positive tendencies, but as well many negative ones. And it's up to us how we can overcome them. So that will be my answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalia. Then we have, I think, two questions for Professor Yeton. If you can address both of them, Professor.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. First question is from Francisca. Thank you, Francisca, for this question. So in my opinion, North Macedonia must be built as an equal state for all who live there, Macedonians, Albanians, Turks, Serbs, Vlachs, Roma, Bosniaks, and all other smaller communities. Realistically, in North Macedonia, we have a multicultural society, which requires greater intercultural communication and building a spirit of respect and cultural pluralism. So the main common goal should be to build a tolerant society. Therefore, our government should support programs that, together with measures in education, social policies, and further cultural development, how to say, should free young people from ethnic restrictions and prejudices and enable them to communicate in which on all they will respect each other. The second question is from Anthony. Thank you, Anthony, for this question. So according to our constitution, there are three entities that proposes laws in the parliament: the government, each MP, and 10,000 citizens with 10,000 signatures. But over 90% of laws are product of the government, while citizens are the weakest entity in the constitutional system that proposes laws. Parliament, as the legal sovereign of the citizens, passes laws in their favor because it decides in their name. However, this is not always the case, especially in cases where certain laws are passed without an inclusive process between the position and the opposition. Or on the other hand, we have laws that, according to the majority, are in the interest of the state and the citizens, while they are being blocked by the president of the republic, as was the case, for example, with the law on the use of languages and the law on ratification of the International PRESPA agreement, which were not signed by President Ivanov and were published in the official gazette only with the signature of the parliament speaker, Jaferi. So as we know today, these two laws, for example, are subject to review before the Constitutional Court. And in March this year, I was invited as a professor of constitutional law to the preparatory session of this court, where I gave my professional opinion on the final fate of these two laws in the light of comparative constitutional law. I think that this will be a short answer. If Francesca and Anthony once more, I am able to give additional explanation. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Professor Yeton. Now we have another two questions for Professor Andeva from Giovanni and Anthony. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah,
Professor
thank you.
Andeva, if you can address them.
Thank you, Anthony and Giovanni. As I understood, Giovanni, you were mostly referring to how the from where the migration flows come in Macedonia. I guess you were referring to the Macedonian case. So, and how does the society in Macedonia reacted to this migration, I guess, flows? As you remember, we all have experienced Italy mostly, but also the Balkan countries, the famous migration crisis happening after Syria country towards Italy, Germany, and other European Union states. We were maybe lucky that we didn't have much migrants coming and staying in the country. And there were, I don't know if you know or not, but there were some interviews from the migrants themselves saying why we should stay in Macedonia, because North Macedonia cannot really offer employment and opportunity and good life for the citizens themselves, how we can actually insert in this society. We don't have any, let's say, we don't see our future here. So we were maybe lucky that we didn't have much, a large proportion of migrants staying and integrating there, even though until till this day, we have in the reception centers, few migrants still staying. Some of them are getting an asylum status here, and they're living and fully integrated in the society. We had sporadic reactions from certain part of the that are coming from different cultures, different religions, and there were some fears from, let's say, people that I don't want to do this distinction between class, but there is obvious in the whole world distinctions of lower class, upper class, high class. So those people that are having this low-skilled jobs, they were actually feared that their jobs will be taken from other people. But these were sporadic reactions, and they didn't last for long. So in that particular time, some political parties also use this opportunity to use this rhetoric of nationalism, and right wing such as Lega Nord uses for quite some time in Italy, but they were not very present in the country. So I cannot say this is a completely different, case, Macedonia and Italy. Anthony, your question is very good, and it's mostly directed to what also Yeton said, and maybe Natalia a little bit, that Ohrid Framework Agreement and the subsequent laws that were enacted and established by this agreement introduced a lot of changes in terms of employment and language use, and as well as employment in the public service. So education are very connected with the language use. So there is a use of Albanian language for the Albanian ethnic community in the primary school. Now with like Yeton said, thank you for this, just being an introduction. The law of languages is introduced, where even previously the Albanian language is as a state official language. So IDs, passports are issued for the Albanian members of the Albanian ethnic group as well in the Albanian language, so double language, even though the Turkish also people and Serbs have this opportunity as well. Employment, equitable representation made a lot of headaches, to be honest, and it makes still headaches, if I can express myself in that way, because it neglects the merit system. I agree with Yeton that we need to strive for a multicultural and a society where all citizens are equal. And this being said, also the merit system should be equal. So if you are good for the job, you have the significant expertise, and this is the employer needs your skills in order to proceed with the employment status and the work. This should not be in accordance with ethnic lives, equitable representation, whether you are 20, 50, 80% of the population, and then this should reflect in the employment status. Unfortunately, this sort of, let's say, quota system, which also exists in Italy as well, it's not a new one, made a headache in terms of that we had quite some time, more than 1,000 people employed in public administration stayed at home, but they actually have their salaries in their bank accounts, and also pensions, social benefits, etc. But they didn't do one single day at work. This is also negative for them because their skills were actually vanishing. They didn't do anything, and they do completely different things. I mean, a lot of cases we have. So this is maybe a negative things in the employment and the equitable representation that I think personally should be really reconsidered and should be addressed as soon as possible. In terms of the public service, Anthony, I guess I answered a little bit with the employment status and the representation of minority ethnic groups in the public sphere as well. Thank you for both of you for the questions. I in this short period of time, I think that I answered them.
Yes, thank you very much, Marina. And we have one more last question to Professor Mirjana. Was exciting to live in the time of changes. The floor is yours, Professor Mirjana. Just please unmute yourself because we cannot listen.
Yes, it was very exciting for me and painful at the same time. Exciting because I was political activist and I took part not only as I took part actually in the events of demonstration in 1968 and then in political action 1989. So I didn't watch only, but I participate. But it was painful when you see what, as I said, what we wanted. We had many things in Yugoslavia. We were satisfied with economic life. We can travel abroad. We had books in our institutes from the West. We could read them and so on. So what do we want? freedom, political freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom to form other political parties. But what did happen at the end of this process? Nationalistic parties came on the first election all around Yugoslavia on power, and the war was spread in Bosnia and Herzegovina and other republics. Luckily, Macedonia didn't have that terrible situation. So it's difficult to see how a country dissolute, any country, I suppose, Yugoslavia especially, because we didn't live, as I said, bad. So it was a painful moment to see disintegration through bloody ethnic wars. So exciting, as I said, at the same time painful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move now with our interactive and last session with your active participation. Yes, so please feel free to unmute yourself and speak or write a lot in the chat. This session will be moderated by Mr. Agron Biba. He has graduated in theater directing at the University of Tirana, has been teaching acting, has been part of many famous series in the region and abroad, and he has been acting and producing numerous well-known shows. We are happy to have him also here with us today. So please, Mr. Agron, the floor is yours.
But please, Christina, you have to listen to me and understand that knowledge is about communism is important as it's still relevant.
It might be relevant and important for older
We are
people,
listening
not
also.
for young people.
Yep.
We are listening. The floor is yours.
You have to listen to me, Christina, and understand that knowledge about communism is important and it's still relevant.
It might be relevant and important for older people, but not for young people.
No, regardless, young or old, everyone that is regarding himself or herself an intellectual and wants to know about history, global economy, political science, or even as general knowledge about humanity needs to know about communism. We can't go anywhere, nowhere, if we do not know where we're coming from. Listen, communism has been part of many countries in the world for 2 or 3 or even more generations. So even if it was not part of some Western European countries, communism has influenced many people, many thinkers, economists, philosophers, opinion makers, even sports and popular culture. Christina, we cannot think about tomorrow of today if we do not know about yesterday, about last century, for example.
But that's exactly my point. Young people have nothing to do with communism. They were not alive then. There was no internet, no YouTube, no Facebook, no Instagram, no Spotify, no smartphones. Talking about communism is like, I don't know, talking about dinosaurs.
Communism is like dinosaurs. Okay, then, yes, okay. Communism equals dinosaurs. Are you saying that dinosaurs are boring? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Try to say that to a 7-year-old and see what happens. Try to say to a 7-year-old that dinosaurs are not exciting and see what happens. I want young people to get excited and interested about the past of human society, as little children are excited to learn about dinosaurs, as I said. You're not suggesting, are you, that I should not know anything about Greek mythology, or for that matter, I shouldn't know anything about Roman Empire, about Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, Charles Darwin, Charles Dickens, because I was not born then. What sort of a lame and lazy argument is that? Just because I wasn't born when electricity was invented, I shouldn't use electricity and internet today. Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. I suppose that my argument is I can use the internet without knowing the science behind it.
Okay, fair enough. You don't have to know every detail about the science behind internet in order to use it, but at least you know that it is science behind it. Imagine if you thought that it is some sort of magic or sorcery behind the smartphone and internet. Nothing, Christina, comes out of nothing. There is always a journey. One scientific discovery leads to another. We cannot jump communism and pretend that it never happened. In global geopolitical sense, we cannot ignore China Can we ignore China, second largest economy and the most populous country? Can we? We cannot. We cannot ignore the existence of North Korea, can we? A nuclear power. We cannot ignore Cuba. Places that are still under communist regime, but definitely will have to go through change. To use your analogy, China, North Korea, or Cuba are remaining dinosaurs of our time, aren't they? Sharks and crocodiles of our age.
Sharks and crocodiles are scary. I wish they were boring. Okay. So how do you plan to make your presentation about communism to be interesting for young students? What's the plan now?
Yeah, it's hard to make it interesting after a couple of hours of listening all the time. That's actually the idea, to just be a bit jumpy about it and talk about some things that we didn't have chance to say. Anecdote. Let's start with an anecdote. A large, big, extended Jewish family in Liverpool. Hi to everyone. In Liverpool, talking about their idea up after October Revolution in Russia. They were thinking about how and where to continue. Christina, yes, please sit here and help me with the technical side of it. So they were discussing about how and their life is going to continue. In Liverpool, big extended Jewish family. So one part was thinking of going to New York and the other part was thinking to go to Moscow because they heard quite great things about it. So they said, but what if we go somewhere, we don't like it and kind of a pogrom can happen? How can we communicate? We write letters to each other. Okay, we write letters to each other and say, if it is nice and better in New York, we all go and live in New York. If it's better in Moscow, we all go and live in Moscow. So they said, okay, we have to set up a secret code. Secret code is going to be a green color. Yes, if you write the letter in green color, then we know that things are not good. So regardless of what you're writing in the letter, if it's green color, it's no good. So that's what happened. Part of the family went to New York and the other part went to Moscow. And they were expecting for letters to come. And they were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And after 2-3 years' time, letter arrives in New York, in a bakery, in a bagel house of great working this shop. A letter arrives, everyone's around, they close the door, they say, come on, letter is here, let's read it. What color is it, says one. Oh, it's simple blue color. Oh, good, let's read it. And they start reading it, and it says, when we first came here in Moscow, everything was fantastic. They asked us to introduce our children to violin, playing violin, piano. They could go to sport activities. They gave us place to stay. The salary was fantastic, but we couldn't find green color to write this letter. So this, what I'm trying to talk today is about the missing of this green color. The missing green color behind all the communist past of these countries of the Eastern Bloc was that it lasted long enough for a couple of generations to forget about the progressive ideas behind it. Because we also have progressive ideas today. And how do we place them in order to move away from communism? That's one of the dilemmas that young people would have today. I basically want to talk about young people because they are the power, the energy behind of progress of movement and moving forward. And for that matter, I have chosen, I've done some DJing, I would say, on YouTube, to choose some short films in order to, as they say, one picture talks 1 million words, in order to present something about young people and the individual changes that some people have to go through in order to make the collective change. So I would ask Christina if you can help me. We're going to see a trailer. Let me explain first about the film. It's about, it's called Goodbye Lenin. It's produced in 2003, obviously after the fall of Berlin Wall. And it happens around eastern part of Berlin. There's this young man, Alexander Kerner, is a leading role. And he's in his family with his mother, who is a dedicated communist. Their father has left them when she's raising them as a single mother. And their father has left for Western Germany and hasn't returned since, I think. So mother is dedicated communist, as I say. She sees her son in a demonstration about Berlin Wall. She has a heart attack. and she goes to clinical coma. And because she went to clinical coma, doctor says, don't tell her about the fall of communist regime because and the Berlin Wall, because if she gets excited, she might die. So the need of Alexander Kerner to present, and we talk about it. Let's see the trailer first, and then we go back to our conversation.
We cannot hear the audio or the video.
Mein Name ist Alexander Kerner. Ich bin Bürger der Deutschen Demokratischen Republik. Und ich habe ein Problem. Sie liegt seit Monaten im Koma. Die Mauer ist weg. Eigentlich ist das kein Problem, aber meine Mutter hat von all dem nichts mitgekriegt. Alles, woran sie glaubt, hat sich ein paar Monate in Luft aufgelöst. Einfach so. Na, jetzt ist sie aufgewacht.
Den zweiten Fakt willst du nicht verstehen. Ja, nur die Gefahr einer Aufregung von ihrer Mutter fernhalten.
Was soll ich denn jetzt machen?
Der ganze Krempel muss hier raus. Mama muss das Zimmer genauso vorfinden, wie sie es verlassen hat.
Sich ja gar nichts verändert hier.
Was soll sich auch schon verändert haben?
Ich hab so einen Heißhunger auf Spreewaldgurken.
Ein Spreewaldgurken?
Mensch, Junge, wo lebst du denn? Wo ich denn nicht Fernsehen gucken können?
3, 2, 1.
Billy.
In den DDR-Botschaften Prag und Budapest.
Wie ist das mit den 20 Mark?
Hier ist die Arbeit.
Добре. Нормално пешо. Да.
Mama, du bist die beste Mutter auf der Welt.
Alex?
Und wir lieben dich alle.
Was ist denn das?
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. And obviously, it's free to watch on YouTube whenever you have time. Just type "Goodbye Lenin," you will have the whole film with translation. And yeah, you saw the part there where he's trying to trick his mother that Berlin Wall hasn't fallen. He goes back to reproducing the house the way it looked and all the products which have entered from western part of Berlin, to hide them and to bring all the Eastern products back for his personal reasons. Personal reasons are the strongest one because they're connected with us. And that's why I'm trying to emphasize the personal reasons and personal stories. I have a personal story. You, obviously, I would love to hear them, but I know that you are tired and I'm not going to back and ask you. If you have questions, please do write them. But I will tell my personal reason, which is strong. My father has been in Albania from 58 till 67 as a young person to study. And he ended up doing a political prison for 4.5 years. I'm grown with the stories about political prison in Albania during Enver Hoxha's regime, which was one of the weirdest of all, because obviously it was an Eastern and West divided with Berlin Wall and everything what was happening, but it was a unique country in the world as Albania, where in 1967, even the religion completely, it was forbidden. And that was unique, as similar as Cultural Revolution in China, when they kicked out all the good and valuable things that they had, and British Museum is full of them now because they were going through Cultural Revolution stupidly, pushing out everything they have in centuries before. Yeah, you saw there in a trailer maybe a part when mother is waking up and she sees Coca-Cola, the sign. There's another joke about Cold War times when someone goes to President Reagan, and says, oh, Russians, the Soviets started painting the moon red. The quarter of it is already almost red. And he says, doesn't matter, just leave it there as it is. And then they go again and say half of it is red. And they say 3/4 of it's red. And then finally they say, Mr. President, the whole moon is red. What are we going to do? They're trying to promote their communism. So don't worry, just write Coca-Cola on top of it. So this was the difference. This was, for me, the missing part of the green color. Life was going on east and west regardless, but the missing part was the capitalist search and right for progress in economical terms, about having more, wanting more, which was more powerful than the stagnated water, as I would call it in economical terms, which happened in eastern part of the world. Yugoslavia was a special case. We had Olympic Games in 1984 when everyone came, because part of Olympic Games happening sometimes were happening only in Western part of the world, and only Western countries would take part. They would be boycotted by the Eastern, and the opposite was happening. But in Yugoslavia's case, everyone would come because we were the leaders at of the third bloc, as I would say. So I was ready to do some interactive thing about us together. I'm just gonna go and say what I was planning to do, because I know you're tired, and I'm trying to speak and as fast as I can just to go through the idea. I wanted us to count till 10 together. That's a theater game that we play, and which means that we need to feel the emptiness of the silence, to put the number on. And if any two or more people say, for example, number 3, at the same time, we go back and start from beginning to see as a group how we work. But I've seen that you've been very patient and very attentive to everything. I think that just goes, keep it for some other session. If you have something, it's good to try and count till 10, 3, 4, 5 people together, and see what happens if you cannot repeat singularly the word, because everything is done in togetherness. Even the communist regime was done in togetherness. It was a progressive idea that everyone would work as much as he can, she can, and everyone would gain or get back as much as he or she needs. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with that? And that's why they say, if you are a communist, if you are not a communist with the age of 20, then some things, you haven't got a heart, they say. But if you are a communist with age of 30, then you haven't got brains. So that has been used in life in different times, about republicanism against monarchism, and nowadays again used for other references. But there's nothing wrong with being progressive and being young. Please do keep your urge of being progressive. Please keep your energy about left-wing ideas, because you've got time to go conservative later on. This brings me to the second part of my presentation, and that's about. Let me just consult my letters here. in order to come back. Yes, it's in these modern times. Last year, it happened. This racist moment and Black Lives Matter movement shook the world with the killing of George Floyd. Because because nowadays we have internet, we have smartphones, and we can see what happens. And Black activists, they went with the word woke, which comes from woken, awaken, not being asleep about your rights, about the racism which still exists in the world. And killing of George Floyd just kept pushing all the Black Lives Matter movement. And you see them now in European Championship when the football players are going on their knees. They're trying to say that they care about that movement. But unfortunately, some of the fans, football fans, I'm talking here about England fans, they boo their own players just before they will start with the game. They're against that kneeling. And surprises me or surprises me not that they connect the right movement about against racism, Black Lives Matter, with left-wing ideas and agendas. And they start calling Black Lives Matter that is something Marxist and even communist in the United States. But that's one way of portraying everything black and white. And if they do not understand the notion of communism, they don't understand the past, they just go with what North Korea represents today. And they try to equalize the woke with, as they say, wokeism. And I'm just gonna read here that they go with saying that wokeism is, in right-wing thought, is reaction to woke and cancel culture. Joining wokeism allows simple-minded people, they say, to pride themselves on believing they are more enlightened, compassionate than, and morally superior to most of their fellow human beings. So in translation, for me, this means that if I say himself or herself, being in gender-wise woke, which means if I'm using the terms for gender for male and I forget to use it for female, I'm being lazy and just jumping on saying himself, 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 instead of herself, himself and herself, just adding another second or another word to my mouth. And if I continue doing that more often, then I might, from some right-wing agenda, be labeled as wokeist, like snowflake, like someone who melts with the first ray of the sun. And they're tough. The right-wing politicians are tough. They know to go through death. They can, continue even when the pandemic is on, etc., etc. So it's this division of this kind of a Berlin Wall is omnipresent all the time. It's been down since 9th of November 1989, but Berlin Wall is inside our heads. We need to put together the left side and the right side of the brain. We need to put our age of 20 together with age of, thank you, Christina, and age of 30 together, because in between being 20, 30, and 40, we are the years in between 21, 22, 25, 27, 35, 37. And we have time in our thoughts to be progressive and to be conservative for some parts that we care. So I don't think that it's time to be black and white. We all big kind of a rainbow thoughts that we need to have. And one of the things to have this rainbow color, we need to know about communism. We have to know about communism because communism had some progressive ideas. Karl Marx has been proven as one of the leading philosophers of 20th century. In 20th century, when for 2000 in millennial terms, they chose him in Britain. They chose him as a leading thinker. That means that we should not forget about what he was writing about. But Marxism doesn't equal Leninism. Leninism doesn't equal Stalinism. Stalinism doesn't equal Mao Zedongism, and all this doesn't equal Enver Hoxhism, and it doesn't equal North Korea, Kim Il-sung and the rest of them, who are turning into kind of a monarchist regime because they're passing it from father to son and to nephew. It doesn't sound like anything that communism was propagating. And they used to say that the best communist country in the world was Sweden, the place where you could work as much as you can and the place where you can get as much as you need. But that needs a really high moral standard. So going back to, I have to mention this cancel culture as well, which is very prevalent in the Western world, because the media is very powerful, as here as well, everywhere. And cancel culture is when some of the, let's say, leading figures of society would say something which is against woke culture and say that he or she does not feel comfortable about some issues. A cancel culture happens immediately. Twitter's gonna go mad, Facebook's gonna go mad, Instagram's gonna go mad, and then they say this person has made so and so mistake, he or she cannot be a leading presenter of the main program on television, on BBC, on ITV or whatever, CNN. And then that person is forgotten, has worked 20, 30, 40 years of his or her working age, and suddenly he or she has been cancelled, blocked, ostracized. It says here cancel culture is a modern form of ostracism, ignoring, in which someone first cancelled out of social or professional circles, whether it be online, on social media, or in person. Me personally, I think that we shouldn't react in that kind of a jumping on a bandwagon when we just hear that some person said something without giving him or her chance to redeem themselves, to say I'm sorry, to say that they were wrong. So because of these issues, things evolve in a way that progressive thoughts are being labeled, and communism has been used as a stamp mark of labeling a progressive views that people have because of the wrongdoings of communist time, because of the wrong way in part of the world that communism went and is still going, because we say that North Korea is a communist regime, but we forget that the rulers are there passing it from father to son to nephew. We forget about Cuba, that brother is passing it to brother, so meritism is not there. But obviously, the progressive ideas, they have their sell-by date. So we should be aware of progressive ideas. We can't live without them. Society cannot go forward without progressive ideas. But of course, we need to look after the date which is printed on them, sell-by date time, because when the sell-by date time passes, then they started going toxic. And communist regimes went toxic in Soviet Union, in China, as we all know, in Albania, in Czechoslovakia then, in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria, everywhere. Sell-by date is a very important thing to think and to remember. And I want to remind everyone of one very, very important moment, about talking about this young person being 19 years of age. His name is Matthias Rust, German, from West Germany, a pilot, aspiring pilot to be a professional pilot, who flew his Cessna, his little plane, from Helsinki to Moscow Red Square. It happened on 28th of May, 1987, at the time of perestroika of Gorbachev. One young German thought about building bridges between two parts of the world, Western and Eastern. He risked his own life. He was disappointed by the meeting that happened in Reykjavik between Reagan and Gorbachev, and he decided to do what you do. But instead of me talking, maybe we can, if you help me, Christina, to go with the second video. Thank you. So Matthias Rust, being only 19, and that's what 19-year-olds do to the world when they put their mind into it. I think there should be a feature film at one point for this person, and I'm sure it's going to happen at one point, sooner or later.
Extraordinary, isn't it? Airplane landing right by Santa Sofia. Nobody's in it, but...
Bis zu dem Moment, wo ich dann gestartet bin in Helsinki, wusste ich eigentlich gar nicht mit absoluter Sicherheit, dass ich wirklich nach Moskau fliegen muss. Ich bin also aufgestiegen, saß im Flugzeug und jetzt war mal die einzige Frage, was mache ich jetzt? Also ich war total zerrissen. Ich hatte große Angst und auf der anderen Seite war ich auch davon überzeugt, das Richtige zu tun. Mir war klar, wenn ich jetzt nicht die Entscheidung treffen würde, nach Moskau zu fliegen, ich würde nie wieder so eine Gelegenheit bekommen. Also die Hauptidee, warum ich nach Moskau geflogen bin, war die, einfach mit diesem Flug eine sogenannte imaginäre Brücke zwischen unseren Blöcken zu schaffen. Auslöser dafür war damals das misslungene Gipfeltreffen zwischen Ronald Reagan und Michail Gorbatschow in Reykjavik in Island im Herbst 1986. Denn dieser Kalte Krieg war doch sehr bedrohlich und war ein hohes Risiko, dass halt eben wir im Endeffekt doch in eine nukleare Katastrophe steuern würden. Ich wollte einfach den Politikern zeigen, Amerikanern, den Ronald Reagan zeigen, dass es nur der Dialog sein kann, der uns vor allen Eventualitäten schützt. Das Schwierigste war halt eben einfach nur, jetzt diesen Mut zu finden. Würde ich genügend Mut aufbringen, tatsächlich diesen Flug durch den Eisernen Vorhang zu riskieren? Und als ich dann eine Stunde, nachdem ich die Grenze passiert hatte, da in Estland vom Militärflugzeug angeflogen wurde, von der MiG-23, das war der Moment, wo richtig mein Herz so in die Hose rutschte und ich Panik fast bekam. Dachte, oh Gott, jetzt ist mein letztes Stündchen geschlagen. Dann habe ich da gesessen und 4-5 Minuten vergingen. Und nichts passierte. Das Flugzeug war einfach wieder verschwunden. Und dann wusste ich in diesem Moment, ich soll weiterfliegen. Ja, das war einmal schon gar nicht so einfach, als ich da in Moskau ankam, jetzt den roten Platz zu finden. Genau, da bin ich erstmal 2-3 Mal in geringer Höhe, so 5 bis 8 Meter über den roten Platz geschwebt, weil da waren viele Leute. Ich wollte natürlich da nicht, dass irgendjemand zu Schaden kommt. Ne? Also wollte ich ihn durch den Tiefflug einfach signalisieren, Moment mal, gleich will ich landen. Aber jedes Mal, wenn ich wieder oben war und wieder ansetze zur Landung, da waren die Leute wieder genau in der Landelinie. Ne? Da habe ich mir ja nach einer Alternative umgesehen. Oder wie gesagt, da sah ich die Brücke am roten Platz. Ne? 4 Spuren, großzügig gebaut, sehr gut anzufliegen. Und da dachte ich mir, gar kein Problem. Dann lande ich einfach auf der Brücke, roll aus und dann einfach da und dann rolle ich wie ein Auto einfach auf dem roten Platz. Bin ausgestiegen und dann kamen 50, 60 Leute auf mich zu dann. Und dann, die waren alle, die lachten und die waren fröhlich. Und dann sagten die, warum denn? Sag ich, ich bin für den Frieden gekommen, ich will mit Gorbatschow reden und ihn bei der Abrüstung unterstützen. Und da haben die alle geklatscht und waren fröhlich. Gesagt, das ist eine tolle Sache, das ist toll.
Yes, yes. But I try to teach, but I need 2 years for the teaching license.
Rust's 500-mile flight through Russian air defenses won him international notoriety, but it also led to the removal of Gorbachev's defense minister and the biggest shake-up of the Soviet military since the 1950s.
Thank you for your counsel. I hope that Gorbachev will save him from prison because it's a wrong decision.
22 Stunden am Tag nur in diesem kleinen Raum, 2 Stunden im Gefängnisgarten spazieren, das war sehr schwierig. Gerade als 19-Jähriger, weil halt einfach dann die persönlichen Lebensumstände für mich so unerträglich erschienen, dass ich mir oft gewünscht hatte, wäre ich bloß nicht geflogen. Oder meine Lieblinge, meine Eigenschaft ist, ich mache gerne I like to push limits. Grenzen überschreiten, um zu erkennen für mich selbst persönlich, wie weit ich gehen kann. Und das ist sehr, sehr wichtig für mich. Und darum ist der Flug nach Moskau auch heute noch eine sehr positive und wichtige Erfahrung, weil sie mir gezeigt hat, wie weit man als Einzelperson, als Mensch gehen kann.
That's what really happens, doesn't it? When you have a person who is 19 years old, he has his ideas very strong and he's risking his own life to say what he has to say, that he wanted to bring East and West together and to build his own bridge. So name to remember Matthias Rust on 20th of May, 1987, a person who did what he did. You saw everything, and I hope it's going to be a feature film about him, so people to know more about his risk and his contribution to the fall of Berlin Wall, which happened 2 years later. So I was planning to talk about iambic pentameter, about what Shakespeare does. I'm going to reproduce it quickly and explain what it means, why we like Shakespeare, and why am I mentioning Shakespeare now? I wish we had a Shakespeare today to explain about communism and to write about what people went through and to have not just 37 plays of Shakespeare, but to have another, because communism regimes all around the world and the other regimes, they nowadays, they deserve to have theater plays and films made about, because great loss of human lives happened left and right, East and West. But if he was alive, I guess he would have done what he always did. He was very political in his views. He always was searching for that good king. He was in search of a good person, because good person, decent person is basis for everything. I know that every human being has his sell-by date, thought-wise and health-wise and age-wise. But my thing to you today would be that you should keep your progressive ideas always as you are 20, but don't forget to engage your brains as you would be 70, 80. So keep your progressive ideas, because we need them. Without progressive ideas, nothing moves forward, nothing comes out of nothing. And these are going to be my last words. I wanted to show you another film about iambic pentameter, Shakespeare is why we like him, because he goes da-dum, 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 da-dum. That's the beat of the heart. And that's why we like when we hear Shakespeare, because he introduced the iambic pentameter, to be or not to be. That is the question now, because that's the emphasis of the words are going similar as they are in a heartbeat. Listen to your heart. Don't forget that you're having, but engage your brains and think about progressive ideas and give it to time to be conservative later in life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agron. Thank you very much for your presentation and this whole session. It was interesting to hear the comparison of the communism with the dinosaurs. It was interesting to see this emotional video with Matthias, and also this part of the movie Goodbye Lenin, which was very emotional. Thank you very much for letting us know that such movie is existing, and I really hope that you provoke the youth participants to see the movie and to search for more information about the communism and that time of our past, since we need to know the past and where we come from. So now, since we are at the end of our work today, I would like to thank you all for this amazing working day. Thank you to the panelists for sharing with us all of your knowledge, your thoughts, your experience and points of view. Thank you, participants, for your participation in the workshop. Thanks to the interpreters for making our life easier. It's been a pleasure for me to be your host today. I apologize that we didn't finish at 1, but it was very interesting for all, I'm sure. And before we close, I have to mention again about the program tomorrow. Please write me an email confirming your participation in the guided tour at the Museum of Contemporary Art tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and we will share more info on the meeting point in the email. Thank you all once again, and have a nice day. Stay in good health, and see you all on our next 3rd workshop in Italy in October this week. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.